Good morning. Good morning. Thank you for joining us this morning at our Early Learning Advisory Council meeting today. I think if we can move to the next slide, although I think a lot of these are very familiar to everyone, but please make sure to mute yourself unless you're speaking or responding to a question. We do have some Q&A dedicated throughout the meeting. With that said, always feel free to put questions in the chat, and we'll definitely get to those as we go through the course of the meeting. Importantly, if you have any questions or if you experience any technical difficulties during ELAC, don't hesitate to either put something in the chat, or you can use the community engagement email address, and someone from that team will definitely provide you with some support. For the purposes of time, if you could, we could just take a few minutes and do some introductions in the chat. We'd like everyone to share your name, where you're located, and your role, whether you're an ELAC member, whether you're a regional advisor, whether you're a member of the public. Like to do some quick introductions. So if you would, we can take just a few minutes and enter those in the chat. That would be great. Great. I see everyone's introducing themselves in the chat. It's nice to see so many folks here this morning. Great. So as folks are continuing to introduce themselves through the chat, I'll just keep going. Our meeting is actually going to be structured a little bit differently today, and that's very intentional. It's to give some time needed to work on the Fair Start for Kids report to provide recommendations and direction to DCYF. So because of this, the materials that you receive that contain updates. So for example, the state agency and partner and regional coalition updates, or materials that have follow-up on questions that were raised during previous meetings, such as the feedback loop. While all of that has been provided to you, it's also on the DCYF website. We will not be reviewing those today because we really want to give enough time to work on the report, because the last meeting of the report was a very robust discussion, but also we're only able to get about halfway through the report. So hopefully the time we've dedicated today, we'll be able to get through the other half. But make sure to review all those update reports. And if you do have questions on those reports, don't hesitate to put those in the chat. And we will make sure to record those and get responses out to you. Copies of the August ELAC meeting minutes were sent out in advance for review. And thank you, Jessica, for entering those into the chat. What we'd like to do is, give everyone a few minutes, right now to review those minutes, and then we'll see if there are any questions on those before we vote to approve the August meeting minutes. So why don't we take a couple of minutes right now to take a look at the August meeting minutes, and then we'll take a vote. I'm going to give about 1 more minute. Folks have time to review those minutes. Okay, so hopefully there's been enough time to review the August meeting minutes. Are there any questions about the minutes or any adjustments that need to be made to the minutes? Okay, I'm not hearing or seeing anything coming through the chat. And Eric, if I've missed something in the chat, please let me know. But I'm not seeing any questions or any need for correction. So what we'll do now is we'll vote on the August meeting minutes. As a reminder, only ELAC members and regional advisors vote. So if you could place your vote in the chat, you can indicate thumbs up or thumbs sideways, meaning that you can live with it, or thumbs down if you disagree with anything. It's also fine to write your vote into the chat if you do not have a symbol to use. So if, again, if ELAC members and regional advisors could vote now, that would be great by placing your feedback in the chat. And Eric, maybe you can let me know once you're able to capture the vote.
It looks like we just got there with enough.
We just got there. Okay.
Yep.
Great.
We're there.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Approved. Thanks.
Approved. Wonderful. Thank you. Yeah. So now what we're going to do is I'm going to introduce our first presenter. We have with us this morning DCYF, Office of Racial Equity and Social Justice, Racial Equity and Social Justice Administrator, Ray Soriano, here with us this morning. And Ray is here to provide us with an update on the work that is being done at the Office of Racial Equity and Social Justice. And Ray is here today to talk about the importance of centering racial equity in our work and in the development of the Fair Start for Kids recommendation, the Fair Start for Kids Act recommendation report. So with that said, I see Ray is here. I'm going to turn it over to Ray.
Thanks, Enrica. I hope I pronounced that correctly. Enrica, is that correct?
Yes, you did.
Thanks. And you all can hear me okay? I'm Ray Soriano. You see him pronouns. Really pleased to be here and just to be invited to ELAC. What I'll be doing over the next 30 minutes is giving just a brief high-level overview of the Office of Racial Equity and Social Justice within DCYF, including some different ways that we are not only supporting and providing some leadership within DCYF, including, of course, Early Learning Division, but also in the community. So I'll give that overview in just a second. Just a little bit more about kind of where I'm coming from. ELAC is a really special group meeting effort for me in that while I've had a really wonderful career so far that includes a lot of child welfare, I've been with DCYF probably going on 10 years now in a couple of different iterations. My deep background and passion is early learning. And so it's just really cool to be in this space with so many folks who influence and lead and do the groundwork with young children across the state of Washington. Part of my background has been, I was on the ECAP team for the whole state with DCYF for a few years. And before that, I also was a Head Start administrator up in Skagit County. I say up in Skagit County, but unless you're in Bellingham or something, it would be down in Skagit County, right? It's always a reference point. But I was a Head Start administrator for a good size Head Start, and so have that background as well. And was a licensed childcare provider for a couple of big centers in Seattle as well as in Bellingham. And so early learning is deep for me. And I presently on the side, I'm really lucky to be an associate faculty at Skagit Valley College, where I teach in the early childhood education department there every winter quarter. And so anyway, I feel like I'm I feel like I just belong in a group whenever I'm with early learning folks. So just thank you for your work. Thank you for everything you give for many, many years, or if you're newer to early learning, it is the most important work is my deep belief. So just glad to be here. I'll go ahead and share my screen. And like I said, this is going to be a high level overview. And then I'll just open it up to any questions or comments or things that you want to share, as well as how our office can continue to support your work, in particular with the Fair Start for Kids Act and anything else. So I'll go ahead and get this shared here. All right, can you all see that slide? Great. Let me just expand my other screen here so I can see you all as much as I can. It's not, of course, one of those not cooperating with my view. My choice of views kind of day. Okay, there we go. That's better. I do recognize a lot of faces and names in this ELAC meeting, so it's just great to be with you all and see you. So yeah, racial equity and social justice has been a long established within DCYF, even when it was Children's Administration, and certainly the component that was Department of Early Learning years ago had some focus on equity for sure. And then a newer, real more focused efforts around racial equity. And I'll say a little bit about that in a moment here. So I'm part of a team of folks at DCYF that's still pretty new Now, the Racial Equity and Social Justice office at DCOF has been around now, probably going on, I want to say 5-6 years. But this team of us, and we're growing, we have a few more positions to add soon. But I just wanted to give this introduction because it's always good to just see faces of folks that are doing specific work. Carol Byers is my co-administrator. Jazzy is our senior racial equity and social justice specialist, and Alita is our administrative assistant. We live in different parts of the state, mostly Western Washington, based out of Olympia. I'm coming to you from Everett, Washington, which is my home office and where I live. But we do travel around the state to support DCYF and to support the community. And I'm the Racial Equity and Social Justice Administrator, meaning that I do a lot of focus on internal work within DCYF. However, this group of us, we've only been around now going on 9 months. We're a really new team. The former team had a big turnover because they had some other things that they were moving into. And so in all honesty and transparency, and those of you here like Nicole and Ruben and others with DCYF and Eric know that stuff's always changing at DCYF, right? And so, for us, we are in some transition, but it's also really exciting to be moving forward with, just an awareness about the disproportionality, the disparities, as well as just, the broad range of equity issues in early learning and beyond. And so that's a big part of where our focus is with work. Just a real brief about how the Office of Racial Equity, Social Justice, or RSJ, came to be, established in 2020. Oh, I said like 5-6 years, but it's only been 3 years now. Seems like it's longer because the need for it has been decades. So, and really looking at it with an intersectional approach, but leading with race, knowing that not just research and the body of knowledge that we are all aware of points to race as a key indicator of disparity and disproportionality, including in early learning and access to early learning, those kinds of things. We do lead with race, but also commitment to, focusing on other marginalities like gender diversity, disability justice, poverty, etc. And really DCYF's commitment to advance racial equity and eliminate those racial and ethnic disproportionality and disparities. I know I'm kind of reading off of a slide, and that really doesn't have a lot of meaning. I'm one of those folks that years ago with DCYF was just wondering, okay, we're hearing about this. We know about it. We know that, for example, Black and brown children are disproportionately expelled out of early learning programs, right? We've known these kinds of things. So what are we going to do about it? And I'm one of many people like you here who have been asking that question for a long time. And so I'm doing the work from within, as well as partnering with others out in the community and throughout DCYF to make some changes, right? Also, just wanted to note a couple of things, those 3 points below, that there are some documents like Racial Equity Social Justice Framework, something that you're probably familiar with, which is the DCYF Strategic and Racial Equity Plan. And then we do have a policy for racial equity and social justice at DCYF. However, it has not been lifted up enough, and we are presently looking at it at the leadership level to dig into it and to make sure that it comes alive and it connects to the other efforts. With leadership at DCYF, I say we because I get to be part of the upper leadership within DCYF, and we're really doing some good work to move the needle forward, and that includes several folks who are here on this meeting as well. That's a quick overview of just sort of how Office of RSJ started. And again, me as one of the co-administrators on the RSJ team, we're still, fairly new. A lot of us say it takes a couple years to get really into your position, etc. But we're digging in and we're learning a lot. And we are also, we're moving forward with so many things. And I'll share a little bit more about that. And if anybody has any questions, just raise your hand or just jump in. This is just pretty open. I want to, just make sure that this is also interactive as much as possible. Any questions so far? Any comments? And I'll keep an eye out on the chat box here as well. If I can, let me find that chat box.
We've got our eye on it too, Ray. That helps.
Perfect. Thanks. Yeah.
It looks like actually Susan just raised her hand.
Yeah, thanks. Go ahead, Susan.
Hi, Ray. I'm wondering about, I mean, I didn't realize that this office had existed for so long. And what I'm curious about is and I hope this is received in the well-intentioned way, that I'm saying it, but in the field, it does feel like there are, from my perspective, some unconscious bias, perhaps conscious bias, and even racist policies and practices within DCYF and how that's applied to the childcare sector. So what work have you done historically to address these issues, and what do you think will be done or can be done moving forward? Because I think working in that vein towards solving some of these issues will work towards building more trust between the sector and DCYF.
Yeah, Susan, that is one of the most important questions to ask, is what's being done and what has been done. Particularly for you and others who are just seeing it at the ground level. We can talk policy and plans all we want, but if at the ground level there's bias in and discrepancy in, for example, access to funding for for non-English speakers who are providing early learning or who want to, that is a big problem, just as one example of that, I'm guessing, of what you're talking about there. It is really complex. It's a complex issue, all of these things, and moving forward requires everybody. So just to speak to your question, and then if anybody else here wants to speak to it as well, please do, because there's such collective wisdom in this group. Is one of the main things we need to be doing is really diversifying those who are in leadership. And I'm not even just talking across race, but just with really diverse backgrounds and diverse experiences, and all levels of leadership within early learning across the state and at the ground level, so that we can just continue to be bringing more and more voices, and not just voices, but voices that we can take action about and who can lead. So historically, there was a lot done in Department of Early Learning. And I won't say not enough, but not some of the right things necessarily, or not to the depth that we were able to do. And presently it's the same thing. And so one of the things that we want to do moving forward is to be in collaboration with all of you and with providers on the ground level more and more. And that's through licensing. I know Ruben's here. That's, of course, through policies and practices that Nicole is leading and supporting, for example, here, and others as well. And not just doing same old. So one answer to the question, I know this isn't a great answer here, but we have to do things really drastically differently. We got to look at things really drastically differently. And I've come from the school of we have to flip certain things, including systems pieces, really over and really open things up. I'm going to pause there. See if anybody else wants to sort of add or elaborate. It's okay if not, but I know that there's a lot of good thinking here.
I'll jump in, Ray. And yeah. Susan, we every division within the department is required to have a action plan to advance racial equity and social justice. That's an administrative policy. And I could tell you with the child care licensing team, they all completed implicit bias training last year. And then we also are looking at our WACs and our policy to advance racial equity and social justice as well. We changed some WACs regarding LGBTQI+, making sure we're affirming care. So we're looking at our everyday practice, and we're also looking at our current policies and our licensing regs to advance racial equity and social justice. And we do that on a daily basis, and also looking this year specifically regarding some of our rules.
Susan, I would just add in the early learning division, and Ruben is doing this as well. We have an internal racial equity and social justice advisory team who is helping us as we think through decision packages, fiscal notes, some of those types of things. And I think the other thing, as Ray is talking about doing things differently, I think one of the things we're really trying to do is engage in more refinement of processes as they go out. So you've seen us do some of that with complex needs and equity grants and other things where trying to come to provider support, some of our other ally organizations, and we're trying some things out and then coming back, having conversations and refining as we go, so that we're looking at what were potentially, did they accomplish what we were hoping to? Were there any unintended impacts that we need to look at as we move forward? So I'm trying to put some of those practices in place.
Yeah, thank you, Nicole, and thank you, Ruben, speaking on behalf of your divisions. Another, example, as I mentioned, I was on the ECAP statewide team and was also an ECAP and Head Start director for years, and really thinking about how things really played out on the ground level. And just one example is just something I mentioned a little bit earlier around expulsion in early learning. And how, disproportionately, we just know this, it's seen everywhere, that kids who are identified as Black and Indigenous, certainly Black, are just expelled at super high rates. And so I know that for ECAP, there have been very real efforts in these last couple of years to eliminate expulsion in classrooms. Now, it's easy just to say that. The real work is in how is support provided within those early learning environments across the state. So many, over 15,000 kids plus, right, enrolled. That isn't just, okay, providers, with all of your hard work already that you have and the limited pay, and maybe you're struggling with keeping your staffing up. Maybe you are an in-home childcare provider and you happen to have some ECAP to provide some particular services to your families. But now, we're saying let's not expel any children, from your classroom, including those that have been really, really challenging to have in the classroom. But the work needs to happen collaboratively and in partnership with providers for sure, and so that we can eliminate that. Now, that's a pretty radical idea, to eliminate expulsion. I know the K-12 system is something that they struggle with as well. So those are some real efforts, and we have a long way to go still. So just, wanted to include those pieces as well. Anybody else have anything you want to share just across the room here?
Ray, there is a question in the chat. Ray.
Okay, thank you. I think I can see that now. Yeah, thank you. Nucha, did I pronounce that correctly? Okay, great, thanks. Yeah, good to see you. What are challenges and barriers to being able to do the deeper work that you had hoped? And how can we advocate as on the ground professionals and citizens? Yeah, again, really important question here, Nucha. The challenges and barriers largely rest, and this is what I've found, and even as I've taken on a leadership role that's specifically about racial equity and social justice, is that it is so complex. If we even compare to, something that we have been talking about for a long time, like dual language learning or inclusion of children with disabilities integrated into classrooms, whether that's early learning or K-12 or beyond. Some of those have been very real issues that it has been taken decades, including so much legislation, federally as well as at state and local levels, that even with that legislation, we are still where we're at, where we're not where we should be around inclusive practice in early learning, or we're not where we should be in terms of things like dual language or culturally relevant early learning environments. And that has taken years to even get to where we are now. And so one of the challenges and barriers is that this is such a long game to be able to make differences. It has taken decades to get to where we are in our education system, broadly speaking. And so some of the challenges and barriers is that there aren't any quick fixes, and that we have to really keep at it and keep at it and keep at it and keep at it in ways that are focused and that are in collaboration with each other. And as far as on the ground professionals and citizens, a big part of it is I believe is each of us doing our own work about our own biases, recognizing them, really looking to make an impact on our own biases, as well as just being more and more aware of how oppression is playing out, not just in our professional world, but in our communities and in our circles. And then for us to be doing our own work, because as we move forward, and so that's something my team and I are doing, is that we're doing our own individual work. I got a lot to unpack and a lot to undo about my own racism, even as I'm a leader around racial equity. So yeah, that's a couple of things there. I do see Susan's hand up again. Go ahead, Susan.
Yeah, I thought it might be helpful to just maybe give an example of something that may not appear to be racist on the surface, but I recently learned that the federal government requires that if DCYF suspects fraud in working connections, that they're to investigate. But right now, I understand the practice is to audit regardless of whether fraud is apparent. And why that doesn't feel like an equitable practice is that when you think of the childcare sector being comprised of mostly women and many women of color, that feels like a totally racist practice from my perspective. Now, forgive me if I haven't, quoted that exactly correctly with the practice at DCYF, but I think you get the picture of what I'm trying to say, is that that is not an equitable, fair, or socially just practice. And that it turned out it could also be a cost-saving measure for DCYF to only investigate the fraud, not audit a lot of people or whatever. What I don't know is if it's primarily, only providers of color or whatnot, but I wanted to share that as a specific example of what may not rise to the top because of all the things that you're doing, but that's one example of what makes things hard to build trust and to also feel like we're being treated fairly when things like that happen on the ground.
Yes, thank you, Susan, for that. I'm not, I don't know fully on I'm not fully aware of the data on that. But I can anecdotally, and also just from having many friends who are women of color in early learning, say that that's probably true. And before I say anything more on that, wondering if anybody else has anything just to say on that. If not, it's okay. Yeah, very real issue to look at what's really happening with that, Susan, as well as, so what are the mechanisms that continue to uphold that inequity? And it isn't just, policy, but that's certainly it. It might be, just the criteria that are in place around when an investigation happens. But that also includes if there are professionals working, well, not if, but when there are professionals working with that early learning provider, are there biases that are playing out in just whether, in the interactions, or whether they're even, looking at them with any scrutiny. And so, again, kind of what I was saying is that we have to be really clearly aware of where those inequities are. And we're still working on those things for sure. So thank you for that, Susan. I'm taking notes as we're talking here too, because this is going to be good for my office to continue, this deeper work with Nicole and Ruben and others, and we do, I'm going to go back to my PowerPoint here. I don't see any other hands up right now. And I do see Nicole, thank you for that note in the chat box, specifically to Susan. Yeah, this is just a little bit of the conversation. We have more and more conversation about these issues to continue with for sure. I'm going to go ahead and share screen here again. Just a little bit more about where we land as an Office of Racial Equity and Social Justice. Do you see the PowerPoint again? Everything okay? So, ways that our team is working on engaging and currently engaging across DCYF and in our communities is within all of the DCYF divisions. And so, back to a question about one of the challenges is, our team, and we're not the only ones working on stuff. Well, before I came on this team, or even before it was formed, there are so many folks across DCYF. We have 4,800-ish staff in DCYF. A big part of that is within child welfare, CPS, foster care, etc. But so many folks have been doing the great work to overturn and change the inequities out there. It isn't just about this team, but we do support a large organization including child welfare, juvenile rehab, in regions across the state. And then we continue to work on partnerships. And I think one of the reasons why I was hired into my position is because I do have a mix of deep background in both child welfare as well as in early learning. I'm really proud to be an early learning professional, and it's still and always will be something that is a priority for me when it comes to my new work within racial equity and social justice. Let me do a quick check on the chat box. Yeah, Nancy asked, are department racial equity social justice plans available to the public? Yes, that is available to the public, and I'll put a link up here. But also, before I forget, I'm just going to put my email up here in the chat box. And so you can reach out to me with any further questions. It's always good to just be in conversation with you. Let's see. So that's my email address here. I know we're close to time here. Yeah, and thanks, Susan, for your note in the chat box as well.
And Ray, it is okay if you need a little additional time. It's okay.
That would be great. Thanks. And I am going to stick around for some of the meeting too, because I want to hear how things are, moving forward with the Fair Start for Kids Act, and I know there's going to be conversation about that too. So, so I'll be hanging out a little bit too. So working with leadership and in leadership in DCYF, looking at our workforce, and also, collaboration with folks across the state and within DCYF who are doing similar work. Office of Tribal Relations within DCYF. So the Office of Tribal Relations, remember on the ECAP team, we work really closely with folks there just to ensure that we are in conversation and taking leadership from tribal leaders across the state when it comes to policymaking about Indigenous children and Indigenous families across the state. Also, Washington State has an Office of Equity outside of DCYF. It has gone through a lot of change, but we are they have a new crew of really incredible human beings who we're working closely with them as well. And in a moment here, Nancy too, and others, I will put one link to get access to some of the documents like social justice, racial equity, social justice plans. And then in particular with early learning, I will admit that for my team, really providing direct support on Fair Start for Kids Act is still kind of on the newer end of things. We do meet with very busy leaders like Nicole and others about all of these efforts. But for me, and my team, it's really important to keep up with legislation, with funding, et cetera, so that we are ensuring that we're providing support and partnership across the board, including FSKA. And then supporting the early learning workers through advising, participation in work groups, and professional development. I am on the hiring team for a brand new position in the early learning division of DCYF, which is a racial equity and social justice coordinator, kind of a manager specifically for that. That'll work closely with my office. So that'll be great to do that. Also meeting regularly with Nicole and others so that we can just be doing the work together moving forward. And then professional development. We do advisement around professional development that's provided to early learning providers across the state. And then promoting inclusive practices and accessibility, always an ongoing, an ongoing journey there. And then supporting and leading systems change. Systems change is really, really key, as Susan and others noted, is that we got to hit it at those levels for sure. And then, just leaving that with questions, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing. And I know there wasn't a whole lot of time, and I do have a little bit more time left, but wondering if, well, actually, before I do that, let me go ahead and put a link into the chat box. Now, our Office of Racial Equity, Social Justice, we have not been able to, because we are still needing to hire more folks, but we have not been able to update our public-facing webpage. We're long overdue. But within this particular page, which is on the DCYF website, there are some documents within that. And so Nancy and others, you can dig into there. But also do reach out to me if you're looking for more information regarding racial equity and social justice data and other documents that you might not find on this webpage. Just do reach out to me through my email. with a little bit more time left, just wondering if others have questions, wonderings. I know I didn't go into Fair Start for Kids Act at all. I'm learning about it more and more myself, if I'm honest. So that's a big part of why I'm just really pleased to be at this meeting today and the ongoing connection. But any questions or other thoughts that are coming up for you right now? Also, I'd love to hear, if not that, I know I'm double questioning here, but would love to hear even a little bit about anything that you're doing out there that would be good for me to know, for our office to know. And thanks, Mindy. I'm going to go ahead and, oh yeah, that's actually what's not linked here is the DCYF strategic priorities. Thanks, Mindy, for putting that in the chat box. One thing just to add before I'm done today, and I'll just hang out and sit in, is we really have to be having these conversations with each other. We have to be having these conversations. Many of you have been engaged in conversations about inequity, about racial injustice, about disability injustice, about gender injustice for a long, long time. And I just applaud you for that. And these last few years between a pandemic and a whole lot of racial reckoning through, very, very public and tragic murders of people of color and other violence, things have shifted these last few years, including just like for somebody like myself, I never thought I would be any type of real, I'd call myself an activist, let alone a formal leader in regard to racial equity, social justice. But many of us have been called, if you will, these last few years in particular, to do something more or something different to make a change. And so we just need more and more of us, and we gotta create circles of folks who are really pushing things, including pushing against an agency. I work within an agency in which I really disagree and get really angry about some of the things we do. And that's a really hard thing to be, but it is real. It's state government, and we got to make some changes. And so many of us, including Nicole and Ruben and others here who are within DCYF, are really committed to doing that. So with that, and there's not any other comments, then we can go on to the rest of the meeting. Anything else anybody has questions or want to comment about in regard to this? All right. Like I said, I'm going to be learning more and more. I am, of course, well, not of course, I am familiar with Fair Start for Kids Act and have been keeping up on things moving forward. And our office has not been able yet to engage as much as we would want to in real specific efforts and real specific activities related to Fair Start for Kids Act. So I'm looking forward to learning more and collaborating in any ways that we can. So thanks for your time today. I'm going to hang out for a little bit, at least until lunchtime, to learn a little bit more. Yeah,
thank you. Thank you so much, Ray, for
thank you.
For taking the time. That's such important work, and this is such an important conversation. I really appreciate you saying that we have to be having these conversations with each other, and really hope that either you or someone from your team can keep coming to our space here at ELAC, where we can continue to have these conversations. Because 30 minutes just isn't enough time. But so very much appreciate you joining us today. And just to let it.
And for sure, we're working on getting somebody. It might even be me coming regularly to ELAC. So thank you.
That's great. That's great. And just to let everyone know, I know that Ray put links into the chat. We'll make sure that those links are also in the meeting minutes as well, in case you're not able to access the documents. But with that said, I'm going to turn it over to Eric, and he's going to lead us through the FSKA recommendation report conversation.
Thank you, Enrica. And thank you, Ray, I applaud you for creating such a positive energy around a very tough subject. That will help our path forward here and diving into these recommendations, which we have been diving a little deeper and deeper here in the last several months. And this, with all hopes and good intentions, will be, our last brainstorm, where we're going to dive into the final recommendations of the 40 some odd, I think, that you all came up with, and really identify the specifics of those. And as I reset the table here for the really hard work that Emily Morgan did last time with using the Jamboards and being able to capture your voices and suggestions, that's really what my intent is here for today, is to kind of do the same type of process where I will put each of these recommendations up on a share screen. It will be live into the Google document itself. Jess, I think if you have the chance, you could share those links again for everyone. You are welcome to be live into the actual Google Jamboard and provide your comments that way. Or I will do my best to capture those verbally as we have a really deep discussion on a number of topics here today. So the way this will break out is we're going to readdress one question from part one. We have 2 questions to finish for part 2. We will then go into part 3, which has 19 recommendations. And I guess when I say questions, I mean recommendations. And then lastly, part 4, which just has 1. So in total, we have about 23 recommendations to get through between now and 1 p.m. We'll take a break in between. Of course, if you need a break, stand up, take a break. And when you return, I'm sure we'll have captured everything that you missed. So with that, before I just hop in, does anyone have any questions that would be productive, or anything they'd like a little more clarity on that will be productive for this next round of recommendations? I open it up to the room. Okay, I'm guessing you're all vibing with me. So this should be fun. As we get into each of these, I think it's going to be really important for you all to be very specific with how you think DCYF can accomplish some of these. Hold on here, I got to get my Zoom back. Sorry about that, everyone. I'm having trouble getting my share screen back up. Of course, I'm having technical difficulties. I'm having trouble getting it to maximize. So hold on 1 second. Maybe somebody would have something they'd like to share instead of you all watching me fumble through this. I might have to start my Zoom. I'm sorry about this. It's literally not letting me get back to my share screen. Jess, can you just make my screen share, or do I have to do that myself?
I've never tried, but I can look at it from my end.
I'm sorry. I don't know what to say. I cannot get the other Zoom screen to come up. So
Eric, if you need a couple of minutes to
actually, I got it.
You got it? Okay.
I did.
Maybe
yes, I did. No,
Perfect.
I did. I got that solved, everybody. Okay. Back to what I was saying is I will pull up these recommendations in here, and the more specific you all can be on how DCYF can do this thing, the more helpful it will be to DCYF as we see and kind of curate through a number of these recommendations. So part one, I trust you all can see my screen now after my total fumble fest. Oh, that is a little too... Okay, how is that for size? Can everybody see that, or is that a little too big maybe? Okay, so first recommendation, and this is from part one again, is create more contracted slots to secure access for children with behavioral health needs. So what should DCYF do to create more contracted slots to secure access for children with behavioral needs? And I open that up to the room.
Is this for ECAP or generally speaking?
This would be investing in childcare and early learning. So as a category itself, I don't think this necessarily applies or doesn't apply to either. So if your recommendation would like to be specific to ECAP, then I think it should be, or in a little more general sense. So either or. Again, this came from you all in terms of this general recommendation. So what we kind of want to do is vet through it a little more, get a little deeper with it. So that way, we are as an agency really able to take a look at this and use this wisely. Does that help, Susan?
Yeah, I mean, because it also determines, what does contracted slot mean? Is that the same thing as like enrollment based, for WCCF, or is this we want you to pay for so many slots in our centers? I think that's the specificity that you must be saying is missing.
Yeah, well, how can DCYF create more contracted slots? What should we do for that to happen?
There needs to be like funding allocated specifically and support. So like it would need to probably list like what additional support would be provided, because this, will be hard for the early learning providers to, so having saying you need to have two slots available. And with that, these supports will be available. Does that?
Yeah, it does. And I'd like to even go maybe a little deeper here. So you talk about additional support.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
Mental health, like actual mental health interventions, not saying, you have this, but saying there will be somebody who provides support to the family and to the staff, like infant early childhood mental health consultation and like a pyramid model coach. I'm like shooting for the stars here.
Yeah, no, that's good. No, keep it coming. This is kind of what we're after here is the real things that can be done. Like, let us know so we can, again, start to identify how that fits into the current system. Okay. Does that feel like I captured in a general sense what you were wanting to add here? Funding or more funding allocated, and I apologize for any wording I do here today and how ridiculous it might look, but I assure you we'll get everything all, edited up and whatnot. So
it's all good. With the mental health intervention, I might say including consultation, mental health consultation and pyramid model support, because I think those aren't always together. So.
Okay.
Eric, this is Rep Levitt. I don't have a raise my hand function. So would you add me to the queue of comments when you get a moment?
Yes, I will. I'm glad you said something, because I don't know if I've even been paying attention to any hands being raised. Representative Levitt, you are welcome to add to the conversation if you do have something to add right now.
Sure. I think relating to the previous speaker on support, what I hear from early learning providers in particular, particularly working with youth who have behavioral challenges, is training availability or opportunity and access for training for staff, and training, free or training from DCYF or training options, and paid training options for folks as well, so they can have that time set aside to get that training to work with youth. The other thing I hear often is additional support often means additional staff, and resources for those additional staff to work with particular youth, or have a smaller caseload with some youth who may need that attention and support. And so both training, we need trained folks. It's my daughter just got a job working at a childcare center in the city in which we live. It is going to be going through the fingerprinting for DCYFs this week, but she has no training on working with children with behavioral challenges. And so we need specific trained staff in facilities or in centers, developmental centers, to help those families. And that includes within the contract of having the contract generous enough to recognize the needs of these centers, because we don't want to lose them or have them close down because they just don't feel that they're supported in the way their staff need those training opportunities and additional staff for support for those youth. Thank you.
Very good. Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Looking back in chat, I see Nicole had asked a clarifying question. Thank you, Nicole, for that. She asked she's hearing two asks here: contracted slots to childcare providers and additional funds for pyramid and infant early childhood mental health consultation. Is that correct? And it looks like Mary had responded that yes, that is correct. Does anybody else have anything to add to that or to help clarify Nicole's question?
I think my comment will expand, and I guess I also have a question around what does the regarding language piece on the whiteboard there mean? So that's one question. But the expansion is really in terms of addressing the mental health and behavioral health workforce. I'm in the behavioral health, mental health field. We know that there's a crisis across the nation, as well as in the state of Washington. I think one of the potential ways of addressing this is for DCYF to partner up with whoever it is, the bodies that help with the workforce development piece, so that we have a more diversified workforce. So this isn't just about bringing new bodies in, but it's about bringing in a workforce that is diversified and representative of the communities that are being served. And also that workforce has training to provide culturally affirming and responsive care to the communities. If we reference the pyramid model that was mentioned earlier, the pyramid model talks about a more work at the universal basis, the ground level of the pyramid, and the more intensive services as you go up the pyramid. The more intensive services are going to absolutely be there. We know that the state's already working on a community health workforce. So that's something that could potentially be tapped into and partnered with in that work. So this needs to be done at a systemic level and be looking and thinking about at multi-tiered perspectives.
Thank you, Nucha. That's good. I hope I caught most of that, although why is Grammarly trying to mess with me here?
Hey, Eric.
It's gonna go. Yes.
This is Susan. I've been around a long time in the childcare sector, and there was a day when King County provided a public health psychologist Because often what I think we need is real time on the ground in our centers support. And so it was so helpful to have someone come into the center, observe kids in the environment that they're in, and then make recommendations. Oftentimes they were how we might rearrange the room for, to minimize certain kinds of behaviors. So, things of that nature, up to and including behavior plan that possibly would ended up with determining that the care environment was not the right one for that child, but it was in consultation with and with the support of someone who was actually not just got training in it, but had an intense background in it. So that level of service is what I think is necessary, above and beyond any sort of training, because there's no amount of training that's going to make us all trained child behavior, specialists, behavioral science, scientists, those types of things. So that would be my dream, is could we have people that know that and are that and come to our centers and work with our staff on practical day-to-day things that we can be doing. So that would be my hope.
Okay. Create on-site support for someone to work with center staff with daily tasks. Does that capture it? And we'll have the minutes, of course, that are going to have tons of dialogue.
No, not daily tasks, but actually working with kids who are expressing behaviors that are not typical or really hard for the typical child care staff to work with. Not day-to-day but then and then make assessments about, is the environment appropriate? What could we do to change the environment that they're in to help that child? Or does that child really need a different environment than the one they're in? Because we have to be real, we do group care. One-on-one needs for kids cannot be accommodated unless the state can also, like they do in public schools, provide aides that can come in and work with kids. So we're putting a lot on the shoulders of childcare providers when we say things like, well, let's provide training and things of that nature, because I think what's hard is the extremity of the behaviors that we're seeing goes far beyond what should be expected of any childcare program. And I would imagine other providers would agree with that sentiment.
Heidi, it looks like you have your hand raised. Thank you, Susan, for that. I appreciate the clarity.
Thank you, Eric. One thing in our region, I know that's probably not the same across all regions, but in our region, with the Early Achievers program, we have what's called Holding Hope, which are our mental health consultants that work in our region. We have a small region, so we have two, one that works north and one that works south. And we've seen a lot of success with the Holding Hope program. Our consultants that have a caseload between 8 and 10, and they do very intensive work with child care providers, both centers and family care homes. And they do a lot of work around children that have high needs. And they work kind of hand in hand with the coach that's already existing in the program to provide a lot of wraparound services. They can exist in the program anywhere between 3 months to a year sometimes. And so the result is we see a lot of growth and a lot of change and a lot of success with this program. The challenge is there's about 5 times as many providers that need the service at the same time. But what that tells us is that if we can fund already successful programs, like we could use 4 of these folks in our region and still have them have a decent wait list. And we're the smallest region in the state. So, I think looking at existing programs that are seeing a lot of gains and a lot of success around this area, and putting more funding towards that should be something that also should be looked at, because it's a model that has been in practice for a while now. They continue to refine it every year and as they receive more information. And so we would love to see that, just because this has been the most success that we've seen in a program like this. They also live in the areas that they're providing services. And so they're in these centers and these family childcare homes a lot. So it's proven to be very beneficial for our area.
Thank you, Heidi. That's great. Yeah. I think there's an opportunity for us. I put those asterisks there just for us on our end to identify the program a little more deeply, like as far as doing a little Google search and making sure that we understand what Holding Hope is as we kind of build out these recommendations. So I may reach out to you if we do have any questions, and if you do have any more clarity on that recommendation. Now, with looking at time, I want to make sure I am keeping up with chat. I know Jess is there and Aaron's there in the background too, helping. Keeping up with our time, I would like to, if everyone's comfortable with moving to the next recommendation, I'd like to dive into part 2. So without any objection, other than the hand raised, Nicole, yes, please.
I was going to say, so Holding Hope is actually funded by us. It's funded through Child Care Aware and Early Achievers. And so I think one of the things I would just encourage us to do here is where can we lean on some of the other recommendations that are coming out from other organizations as well and leverage that, like the behavioral health work group. So I think we can draw some of those connections if that is something that this group agrees with, just so we can sort of say, hey, there's multiple places talking about this. I think to Nucha's point around having systemic approaches, we want to make sure that we're highlighting that where we can.
Anyone have anything more to share? Okay. I'll take your silence as that you are ready to move on. So now that the screen share issue has been solved, we shouldn't have any more problems there. Can you all see part 2 now? And I'll take any thumbs up from anyone, or just wondering if I need to reshare my whole screen. We are gonna go like that, and I think now you all can see. Okay, great. Now we did start part 2 last time. Part 2 is expanding access to childcare and early learning. So each of these recommendations are related to expanding access. We got through the first 6 questions. There's 2 remaining in this section. And the first is you all have recommended that we make data available on the amount of stabilization funds invested into each program type, broken down by per license capacity, number of kids served, and by the number of early learning professionals employed at each learning facility. So that's a mouthful. I'd love to hear from maybe the individual that had that recommendation, or maybe several of you, I think, support this. What does that look like to you? If we could do that, what would that look like? Okay, well, maybe let's frame that a little differently. And if this isn't something that you feel like belongs on the recommendation report, then we can remove this. Or if you feel like that's adequate and it's just as is, then that again, this is up to you all. So please let me know. But are there things that we can do to improve the data that we provide on stabilization funds and maybe grant funds? I would assume are there things that we can do? And this is not the grant process. This is just making that data available to you. Senator Wilson, I see your hand raised. Please.
Yeah, good morning. I guess I'm a little confused by the word stabilization funds, because in my mind, they were directly related to pandemic and to relief that was coming from the federal government and the decisions the department made on where those dollars go. So that is a was. I don't believe those stabilization funds will continue on a regular basis. So perhaps it is the conversation around when there are dollars or when there are applications for funds or grants available from the department. How does the department share data around? It looks as if people are interested in knowing kind of how the dollars are spread across not only service area, but delivery type and, kinds of programs. So I guess that stabilization is something that is not, I think in the future, something that we may want to use as language.
Okay. I'm wondering if...
And that may only be me, and y'all may know better than I, but that just to me is tied directly to a pot of money that was available based on our recent issues in our country.
Yes, I'm wondering if maybe a better term would just be grant funds. I'm wondering if members here would prefer that term, grant funds, as opposed to stabilization funds, which of course Senator Wilson explained are very specific to the pandemic funds. I think this captures it a little at a larger level. I think that's probably the intent of this. So does everyone feel that DCYF, that we do a good enough job with making the data available?
Eric, I see Colleen's hand, and then I have to. Could we?
Oh yeah, please, Susan. Absolutely.
Colleen, go ahead.
I was going to share similar to what Senator Wilson said, that I mean these are past funds. It was a one-time pot of money. I would be more interested in a recommendation that leans into making sure that we collect this data with future funds and have that sort of information provided on dashboards and things like that are put together. So for me, it's not about just the one-time situation, but more of leaning into that as we collect this data in the future, that it's readily available in an easy fashion, like dashboards.
Yeah, excellent, Colleen. Thank you.
I was going to say, Eric, grant funds to me sounds like a competitive process.
Okay.
And right now, the childcare sector doesn't need that. What we need is something similar to stabilization funds, in that we need it to sustain our businesses. So maybe it's childcare sustainability funds, not stabilization funds or something. But I am not a proponent of making it a competitive process, because the entire sector is in dire need.
Yeah, no, I understand that. That makes a lot of sense. Does anyone else have anything in support of what Susan just said, or maybe thinking that grant funds has a different meaning to you? Or another word, maybe that we could just take out grant, I guess, make data available on the amount of funds invested into each program type. I think that might make a little general, for at least for DCYF, and Nicole could probably chime in on this, that like, what funds are you talking about? So I think
if it's just available, make data available on funds invested into each program, right? And it would be just really helpful to know also on what we already put out there around some of our grants, what you would like to see differently, because that can help us again refine that process. But I don't want to miss what Susan's saying, which I think maybe somewhat linked to what Lois is saying, because I also heard an ask from Susan, and I just want to check in for understanding around funds that are not competitive, that's a different pot of funds that aren't competitive to sustain childcare. And then I think Lois has a question in here around the capital gains fund. Is that accurate, Susan?
Yes, I think that's a fair characterization. Thank you.
Lois, it looks like you are asking if there's a reason why the legislature can't amend the capital gains funds legislation to allow for stabilization funding. That should be added as a recommendation. And wondering if you'd like to share a little more, or if someone here would be able to, I think, identify why that wouldn't necessarily work for this recommendation report.
Well,
Lois, if you...
I think that'd be, I'm here. Yeah. Can you hear me, Eric?
I can, yes.
Okay, good. I was just, so my question is, if we look at, and it's a little bit separate, you know, from the data collection, but just thinking about report recommendations, and we had talked about breaking down the difference between what the department can do versus legislative ask. But I think that even with having that difference, we could still maybe consider, if this group is open to it, adding it as a recommendation under the legislative recommendations, is that we do need more, as Susan put it, childcare sustainability funds. We can move away from stabilization if that's too narrow, but the sustainability funds is something that is desperately needed, especially as we see more and more centers closing across the state. And I'm thinking that the capital gains money that we were promised would be utilized toward early learning. This is the best way to do it, because yes, it'd be good to open more sites, but we also need to retain what we have.
Yeah, I'm wondering if this being a recommendation to the legislation, although I think that's honestly very well said, Lois. I don't know if in this recommendation report, and please somebody correct me if I'm wrong, this is specific to what DCYF can do or should be doing. I don't know if DCYF can have the legislature amend the capital gains fund legislation, if that makes sense. I don't know if that's something that we're involved in. You know, I mean, I know we're not, but I don't think that fits with here.
So here's the thing, Eric, about that piece, is that it is not something that DCYF does not control what the legislature does, but it does have its own budget ask. We know it's too late for this year, but it can be added as something that's brought up, even if we put it in an amendment section, or I'm sorry, not amendment, in an appendix section, that these are some topics that were brought up within the group that is outside of DCYF scope. However, the body felt it was important to include it. And there would be nothing wrong with that, because it is something that needs to be brought to the attention of lawmakers.
Yeah, I like the idea of you know, having that, call it appendix in it here at the end of the recommendation report. So what I've done is I've flagged that on that particular topic. So we'll make sure that it gets incorporated in, or even maybe we still have a lot more recommendations to get through. Maybe that will actually come up a little further down the road. So okay, well, I feel like we've gotten here with this particular recommendation, although I see a hand raised. Sorry about that. Colleen, please, you have the floor.
Thank you. Senator Wilson had her hand raised too. I'm not sure if you still want to chime in. I think you were trying to answer.
Well, I just wanted to caution us about thinking about changing anything like cap gains. That's not something that would actually happen. So if we want to talk about how we're utilizing the dollars that are collected from cap gains, that's one thing, but you will not find anyone trying to open up that piece of legislation. Or again, remember, it went through Supreme Court. It went through lots to get where it is. So just FYI, that would not be anything I think that I nor my colleagues would recommend, because it's around a funding source. It's not about operationalizing how we use those dollars. It's saying that anything that comes in, you know, below that 500 billion is, or million is, goes to early learning, but it is not about spelling that out. So just really want to caution us when we think about recommendations. Really, it's just around really what are those resources and supports, and it's up to the legislature to kind of figure out, if you will, how it is that it's funded. And we will have additional dollars, but it'll be a constant conversation, you know, every time we come back, every legislative session. And I know Rep. Levitt, I'm seeing you online saying that kind of the same thing. So hear you totally, Lois, just concerned about, you know, we don't want to bring something back up that potentially would cause us to have a different outcome than we received. Just a caution.
And I'll echo.
So, Senator,
I echo Senator Wilson's comments very, very much.
Okay, so then let me rephrase that ask. Maybe the language that I'm using is on the process, may not be correct, but I believe you, the intent is clear, which is to be able to have you look at ways as you look at the budget for this upcoming session, for those who are in the legislature, to look at this ask, whether maybe not amending the current legislation is the correct way to do it, but if there's a way that we can look at an operational use of those funds. So Senator Wilson, whatever language you feel is correct, you can feel free to, you know, write that in the chat. But I think I know you understand.
Yeah, no, I hear you.
Thank you, Senator.
Yeah, no, I hear you, because it's about the resource totally, and about how it is we're spending and how we're leveraging and how we're supporting this economic recovery and the profession of care. So I hear you loudly. I just want to be really cautious about just opening us up for something that we're not ready for. So appreciate that, and appreciate everything y'all do every day for kids and families across the state.
Thank you, Senator Wilson. Colleen, do you still have your hand up or still raised?
I do, yes. So just to loop back to this recommendation, I know myself convening provider groups and the engagement I have there, there's a lot of concern around, you know, capital gains funds and the amount that was supposed to be spent on early learning. And so I think it would actually be really critical to name that in this recommendation, that one of the pools of funds that would be of huge interest would be to track the cap gains dollars that are going into that, I think it's called the Education Legacy Fund, and then those funds where they're being spent, you know, on early learning specifically. So I know there's quite a bit of questioning and concern around those funds having gone into a fund that also has access to K-12 and otherwise. And for most folks, there's a lot of confusion on how to track, you know, is 500 million that's going in there from cap gains really being spent on new early learning programs or not?
It's not early learning programs within the public school system, right, Colleen?
Yeah, and I'm sorry if I cut out, guys. I've had terrible internet these last couple of days, so I froze for a second. But yes, just making sure that it's being spent on early learning, and I do think folks would be interested to know whether that is early learning in the private sector or early learning in the K-12 sector.
Okay. Looking at time here, we're running a little slow outside of my technology fumbles. We're about 45 minutes into this, and we've only gotten through 2 of these recommendations, actually 3. So I just want to be mindful of that. Not that you all, of course, if you have more to share, please keep sharing. And this is your time. So if some of you can stay on a little longer, or I don't know what, we'll deal with that at the end and see, I guess, how far we can actually get through this. But with that, I'd like to move forward to the next recommendation in expanding access to childcare, and early learning. Unless there is an objection, I will take that silence as a no. Okay, the next recommendation is ensure reports and data is shared with the community, including both qualitative and quantitative data to provide a clear picture of what is happening. Sounds to me like that is almost identical to the previous recommendation, and a lot of the clarifying pieces that you all added actually really support this. Would that be correct, or do you all have more to add to this recommendation, or would you like us to maybe meld the two? Okay, good. Yeah, it seems that the overall recommendation is really about access to data and reports for you all, and that includes childcare, the community support funds, grant funds, qualitative, quantitative data. So we'll just kind of make sure that they all kind of meld together in that. So excellent. We just gained some time right there. Okay, with that, I will move on to the next, which I believe is the last question here in part 2. And this, or recommendation, excuse me, recommendation is to provide financial supports to attract and retain members of the early learning workforce through state funding for compensation. Does anyone have anything further to share or expand on this recommendation? Okay, well, you guys are a quiet bunch today. Oh, and let me look at the hands raised. Sorry, there are none. It does seem a little straightforward to me. You're saying, provide more money to attract and retain members of the early learning workforce through state funding for compensation. What I think might be missing is how can DCYF do that? Senator Wilson, you have your hand raised.
I'm just wondering if this has a connection to the work that we're doing about the living wage proviso and the cost of care work. And again, this is that, but there is work happening. There was a budget proviso done, and as much as we can connect things, it's important so people understand there is work happening, because unless you're inside this, it's really hard to know, as you well know, how things are connected. So just as Nicole brought up the work that was the work that's happening in the behavioral health work group, there's also the budget proviso around living wage and cost of care. And so in my mind, those would be pieces that would be critical as we think about what the state's role is in this. So just want to make sure, again, we're making those system think connections for folks and using the resources and the information we're gathering and paying for to help us move forward in this system creation, if you will. So, and I know that report is due, I do believe, this session coming up. So we should have that information that should then drive us to what our next steps are, as far as whether it's investments or legislation or whatever.
Thank you. That's great clarity. So as I look at this question, I'll try to reframe it a little differently one more time to see if we can go a little deeper. And then if not, if it is just as it is, then that's okay. If DCYF did have the financial support to do this, what would it look like? Like, what are the things that DCYF can do specifically
Well, I'll say if the sustainability funds route is one way to go, or a way that's possible, that would give childcare providers the opportunity, like we did during COVID, to use funds towards increased compensation or bonuses and things of that nature. It just really depends on how much we're talking. If it's meaningful and significant, or if it's a couple thousand here or there.
Okay. That's good. So more funds would then allow you all to increase compensation and bonuses. What else? Okay. Oh, great. You guys are so quick in the chat. It looks like we do have a couple recommendations in here. Claudette, it looks like you have, I guess that's not a question, that's a clarification. And any of the recommendations you all make in chat, of course, we capture that, and that will also be folded into this. I'm honestly, shocker, but not real good at doing a lot of little teeny things at once like that. So I don't know if I can capture that and get it in here at the same time. So I do assure you, though, that everything you're putting in chat related to this will be captured. And perhaps any of you that are having some of those really great points, if you'd like to share those verbally for the others, that'd be great. And it looks like Colleen actually has a question. So is this, and this is probably to the group, is this recommending that DCYF include these funds in their decision package or some agency requested legislation? So as you all look at these financial supports, would this be something you'd like included into DCYF, a DCYF funding package, or excuse me, decision package, or other agency requested legislation? While you all think about that, Jen, looks like you have your hand raised. Please share.
I'm part of the compensation design team, and we've been working pretty diligently over the last, I don't know, been 18 months or so. First with the living wage proviso, and now on the cost of quality care rate model. I would read this recommendation as just the agency supporting that work or continuing to support that work, which I think is already, I know it's already happening, but just the continuation of the support of the transition to cost of quality care, because that will also then increase compensation when the rates are such that compensation can be a living wage for staff.
Thank you, Jen. Anyone else have anything to share related to this specific recommendation? Okay. Well, with that, we will move into part three. Part three is, excuse me, a fairly large section. I believe we have 19 recommendations in. We are going to be taking a break at, I think, around 11. So if you all can hold on for another 22 minutes, then we can take a quick break then. Or if you all just want to power through, it's your meeting. So I am completely flexible to how we get through this. But I do think it's important that we do try to get through it as best we can. And we'll worry about that when we get to the end. Yes.
I just have a quick question about how this recommendation report, I mean, are recommendations for this report taken from the temporary licensing subcommittee report, or how do the two work together? Because there's a lot of really good recommendations in the temporary licensing subcommittee report that I know is an internal report that doesn't have a plan to be distributed to legislators, but I think it would be good for legislators to become well versed in what providers are actually saying. So what's the connection between these two reports, if any?
That's a great question, Susan. The context of them both, I think, is similar. But these two recommendation reports are not necessarily intertwined. The TLS report, as you all know, was specific to licensing. And of course, I understand licensing fits into FSKA and this particular recommendation report. But the TLS report, was very, very specific to that. This particular recommendation report is similar in style in the way that we kind of tried to get to the end. But the content is a little more, I guess, a little more specific and even broad at the same time, because it's specific to the Fair Start for Kids Act items or programs that have funding attached to it. And so that might be where the separation is. Now, I do agree or think that if there are recommendations from the TLS report that you all feel are important, that should be in this recommendation report, again, related to Fair Start for Kids Act, related to DCYF, and this is the recommendation we have for you, then I think it would be really applicable here. So I don't know if we necessarily can go and find those and attach them in, because there were about 34 of them. And I'm wondering if you all have any recommendations on how that could be folded in, or if at all.
Well, couldn't some of those recommendations be part of a decision package or even in this report that we want to submit? Because what it's about is the focus was to what are the barriers to childcare, people coming into the field, or why they're leaving them. And the recommendations are in there are to help the childcare crisis. So it would seem to me that they would be extremely important and relevant to recommendations that DCYF would be making to the legislature. So I'm a little bit confused about the disconnect, because childcare voice was very loud and present in those recommendations. And it's really about what of those recommendations does DCYF feel they can actually put through in this, recommendation report. And, that, because I know you can't do all 34, but to not put forward any of them feels like, why did we do that report then?
Who do you feel should go and put all those recommendations into this report? Do you think
I'm saying if you have to be selective about it, but
okay,
if you're not going to use those recommendations for anything other than to say you can check that off of the to-do list in the Fair Start for Kids Act, then that's not going to, I personally don't appreciate the time I spent in those meetings helping to develop those recommendations. So what is going to happen with those recommendations if they're not being moved forward to make change at the legislative level? That's what I'm wondering about.
Okay. What I'd like to do is I guess almost shelf this a bit. And the reason is that the TLS has a process. It has a tracker that has been used. There is some work currently being done within licensing to make that a better experience for you all, and then also a better operational workflow for licensing. So it really becomes something that is of value. All those items on the TLS tracker, they are not going to fall through. They're going to remain on this tracker or whatever form that kind of becomes. And DCYF will, over time, be able to address those as they're applicable. So I assure you that work there is absolutely being used and help develop a lot of our path forward. Looking at this particular recommendation report, maybe the biggest difference is that the TLS report was recommendations to the agency, and then this report is to the legislature. So legislators will review this report, whereas maybe they didn't necessarily see the TLS report unless they were provided a copy of it. So the Jamboards are going to stay open after this. And Susan, what I would encourage you to, or even anyone else, and I know your time is very minimal, especially as you put in all this extra time doing these things for us or with us. I would encourage you to look at the TLS report and have access to these Jamboards here, that you're able to add those items in, and even here at this late in the game, that's okay, because we still do have a little time to incorporate that in. But I don't know if it's something that we on the CE side, on the community engagement side, would be able to go and say, oh, this applies, this doesn't. So I think it really needs to come from this group. And I'd love to hear anybody else, any thoughts they have or differently or in agreement. They're so silent. Little did you know, I do not do well with uncomfortable silences. Enrica, you have your hand raised, please.
Yeah, I think what I was thinking about as Susan was talking is maybe perhaps doing in some respect, a crosswalk of the reports, a crosswalk of the TLS and this report as a way to see what of the recommendation of the TLS report might be ones that we want to include in this document that's going to be sent out. So that's what was crossing my mind as Susan was speaking.
Very good. Yeah, I think it's an awesome point, Susan. I really do. I think it's really valuable to make sure that stuff is included in here. So I love the crosswalked idea or term. I did make it pink just to signify that when Emily's back, we have a little more work to do on this. But I think this is a conversation that we'll be able to find a way to get those recommendations in, whether it's working with the EC directly with Enrica and Lois, and then working with you all, or again, you have access to the Jamboards, and if you don't have a copy of the TLS report, then please ask, or maybe the tracker, and you are more than welcome to absolutely anything that is applicable should be in this particular report. Senator Wilson, I see you have your hand raised.
Yeah, and I really appreciate Enrica's comments, because I think I am not knowledgeable, Susan, around the insides of the TLS report, and clearly you want it to be a tool, not a task. And I think sometimes there are recommendations that support things that are happening inside the agency, like operations or procedures or rulemaking and such, that really don't have a legislative nexus, that wouldn't show up in a decision package. And then there may be other ones, that those recommendations with the crosswalk, that would show that there is a legislative nexus, and it would be something that would come to that legislative level. And then the other thing I always think about is we're coming into a short session. So another decision that has to be made by the department oftentimes, or the agency, is this a short session DP, or is this something that stays on a list, as you say, and then is more apt to be done and worked on over a longer session of 120 days. So I think it's really important when we're looking at the recommendations to actually, figure out where is that nexus, because it isn't always a legislative nexus. And I think that sometimes one feels like the work goes unnoticed, or nobody does anything with it because it doesn't lift itself that way. But then there are very much work that's done that does need to be lifted and turn into legislative changes and such. So just wanted to make the clarity, because I think it's so important that people know the work that they're giving and that they're providing, and the information they're providing is not just a task, that it is actually, it's being utilized, and we're thankful for the time people give to give us that input and that feedback.
Yeah, very well said, for sure. So to close up that topic, Susan and Enrica, what I've done is, again, I've made a note here kind of separately that we'll make sure that the TLS itself and the tracker and or report itself, that whatever recommendations on there should be brought into this. We'll make sure that they're crosswalked over, and we'll work with Enrique and Lois, I think, to make sure that that gets onto here, which you all will see, of course, a new version of this. So it's not like we're just going to take all these recommendations and put them in a recommendation report and then that'll be it. So there will be other iterations of this. So with that, we're going to move forward to, and Senator Wilson, we'll make sure that you also maybe get a little more context on the TLS report and what that was and, you know, how it was used. So we'll make sure and follow up with you on that as well. So with that, we will move forward into part 3. And your recommendation is finding more providers to serve families, use of telehealth services, and funding to support this, recruitment and retention of staff. So this was a suggestion on the survey that we had sent out before. Sorry for getting the Zoom here thing. I'm obviously going to give you all. Okay. Trust me, if this was a Microsoft platform, I'd be able to operate it just fine. So again, finding more providers to serve families, use of telehealth services and funding for this, recruitment and retention of staff. So what can we do specific to do that? And this is supporting childcare and early learning. Jen? Yes, please.
Is this recommendation, I'm not quite sure I know what this is trying to ask, like with mental health supports for providers via telehealth or something else? I don't think I even understand what this is asking.
Yes, I'm wondering or hoping that if maybe the individual that actually did make this recommendation was on here, they could provide a little more clarity. This was just pulled straight from the survey, right? You know, as far as what the specifics are, I'm also not 100% sure as to how this fits. When we get to maybe a recommendation like this, if you know the group itself is confused, then and we can't, I think, clarify this effectively, then my recommendation is it's removed. But again, that would be, I think, up to you all whether or not this recommendation should stay or be expanded upon. And with that, I'd love to hear from anyone.
I'll just say that, you know, this is a topic of conversation in the behavioral health subcommittee, and that goes prenatal through 25. So it is definitely an issue when we think about our rural communities and communities around accessing mental health, behavioral health services, whether it's family focused or child focused. I don't know if that's what it's dealing with. I guess what I would say is if it was removed, it certainly is a topic of conversation as we're thinking about all families and all young people across our state. So it wouldn't be lost. It just wouldn't show up here, but clearly in the task force, it has been an ongoing conversation and the meetings that I sit in on, and I'm assuming that others from DCYF or other folks involved in the task force could speak to that as well. Just don't want people to think if it is removed from here that we are not thinking about or looking at or considering how it is we're connecting families to the healthcare and mental and behavioral health services and supports they need, regardless of where they live. or what they've got access to. Just some initial thoughts.
Yeah, thank you, Senator Wilson. I did, kind of based on what you were saying, I added mental health providers. So it is specific to mental health. My assumption is that's was the intent here. And wondering how you all feel about that change, about being more specific to this, finding more mental health providers to serve families, use of telehealth services, and funding to support this, and then recruitment and retention of staff. And oh, we got a couple chat. Boy, you guys are quick in there in the chat. Let's see. Claudette asks, for recruiting and retention, that would be funds available to all providers. Perhaps the thought was somehow DCYF could assist in attracting providers. And it looks like Nucha agrees with that. Okay, why don't we get this copy paste skill, everybody? They said I couldn't do it. And also Nucha then has added, but also access to mental health support for EL providers to retention and sustaining. So it looks like that funding would increase access to, would that be Nucha? Would that be correct in your question? And okay, good. Looks like, thank you, Nancy. It looks like she said it does make it easier to understand. So, okay, good. I think we have gotten as deep as maybe we need to on this particular recommendation. Like I said earlier, these Jamboards are going to remain open, so there is more opportunity for you all to please come in and provide a little more context. You know, we're trying to get it all as best we can, and sometimes you may not think of something till later, and that is completely fine. We still really want to make sure it's incorporated, and we still want to hear that. So moving then to the next recommendation, we'll maybe tackle this one and then take a quick break. And this recommendation is provide resources for education and healthcare to bring people into the field. So into the field of child care, into the child care field, obviously. I think that is self-explanatory. Are you all, or whoever possibly agrees with this recommendation, would these be new resources or maybe allocation of existing funding? Are there certain things we're doing that you would like us to continue to do?
Can I add maybe loan forgiveness for education for individuals entering the field? We do that for many other high need areas. And right now this is a need. Just a thought. Yeah. Just a thought.
It's very progressive. I love it.
Yeah, Eric, on that note, I was going to ask for clarification. Is that what people need by resources for education? Because we do have loan forgiveness programs, for example, for healthcare workers choosing to work in rural areas, or additional scholarships for rural areas or certain high need areas. And so I would be curious, whoever, for those who are supporting it, to get a little bit deeper, as you say, on that. Serving on the workforce committee, that's a top focus of ours in many industries. And so it would be great to gather more information if that's what you're talking about specifically for childcare. That would be helpful.
Thank you, Rep. Love it. Representative, I realize that I just called you Rep.
That's okay. Call me Mari. It's easier.
Good. I will call you Mari. Thank you. Okay, that's actually a great clarification. I would love to hear some of your all feedback. Colleen, looks like you have your hand raised.
Yeah, so to that, I love Senator Wilson's idea of loan forgiveness, and I think that would be hugely beneficial. But we also have to address upfront barriers as far as being able to access education programs. And so we want to make sure that we're also putting robust funding into community-based pathways and any of those alternates to what we see as traditional education in a college or university setting. So, funding for me has to be addressing both ends of that spectrum. It has to be removing barriers up front so more can participate, and also going back and refunding loans and doing that sort of forgiveness, because we really know that a lot of our childcare staff are at max capacity, and access to education programs, even if they're willing and have somehow found a source of funding and whatnot, doesn't mean that classes are actually available at times they can participate, or that they have access to childcare and other supports that they need to be able to complete those. And in the state, we have really robust education requirements, and they haven't really been in full force yet, but we are quickly approaching deadlines for that, and we're going to see a huge exodus from the field as far as staff once those provisions get put in place here in the next year or so. So I want to make sure that if we're talking about resources, that we're looking at it across the whole spectrum. And then in regards to healthcare, there was some programming done to offer healthcare to staff. I know in my personal experience, and that's what I'll speak to with my staff, most of them that applied did not qualify because there were income provisions put in place. And then they also could not afford to participate in the health plan that we offer because there was, albeit a smaller a portion of the cost of the premium, there was still a cost to staff, and they were unable to afford to pay that and unable to access what the state had put in place. So I think it was a great step, but I think we can learn from that step and hopefully get something more robust in place.
Eric, I just wanted to add to that when Colleen mentioned that, access to childcare is also a barrier to providers getting education. One thing that still needs to be addressed in Working Connections childcare is the idea that childcare providers whose children receive Working Connection subsidies can't work in the same classroom or same center as their child. And for school age care, that is particularly troublesome because many of us only have one room. It's a cafeteria or a gymnasium. And so I can speak specifically to KidsCo. We have staff that we have not been able to retain because they couldn't bring their kids to the same center that they worked at. So that could also be a barrier that could be removed to open up possibilities for childcare workers in the sector. So it's not necessarily money even, it's just maybe a rule change that could be done.
Yeah, okay. All right. Yeah, my next question was going to be, obviously, are you asking, for funding to do this? So it's doesn't necessarily have to be more funding. It could be a rule change. Good. I thought that was an excellent point at the end. Okay, so we are at 11:02, and I know you all have just been so focused for the last 2 hours with me on this. I really appreciate it. We're making progress. I like the work that you're all putting into this. I think we're getting, maybe as deep as we need to go now, and for time constraints. But then, like I said, I'm hoping that maybe you all take some time to go and get into these Jamboards maybe later today and help us really build this out a little better. So we are at the point of taking a quick break. So unless everyone would like to avoid the break, which I don't believe you all would like to do, we can take a 10-15 minute. Does anyone have any preference? I am an open book. 15 looks like we have a winner. 10? Oh. How about we'll stay on script. We will stay with the agenda, and we will do a 12-minute break. and we will be back at 11:15. How's that work? Okay, cool. So please take some time, stand up, hydrate, loosen up. We still have a few more hours here, and I do appreciate your participation in this. You guys are making this somewhat painless. So we will see you back in 12 minutes. Thank you. Hello, all. Welcome back. Can everyone hear me? Okay, excellent. Saw a thumbs up. So let's get back into our screen share. I hope you all had a nice break and did something that made you feel good, because lunchtime is coming. Okay, back into part 3, and we are on recommendation 3. And you're all recommending that we shift income from federal poverty level to area median income. Currently, ECAP and Working Child Care Connections uses SMI, which is state median income. And the implications of using an area median income should be discussed. So with that, I'd like to open this up for your all thoughts and maybe a little further clarification on what that would mean and why that would be important. Sometimes it's so quiet, I wonder if my headphones have died and you're all talking and have all these great things to say that I'm not capturing.
Eric, I'll add,
okay.
Why area median income is really important.
Yeah.
Is for, even like for childcare providers who are now eligible for WCCC, in certain areas of our state, the state median income is still too low of an income threshold for some areas of our state to participate in. There are some childcare centers in Seattle that are paying $30 or more an hour for childcare staff, which can make them ineligible even at the 85th percentile. So I think that's why it's really important to consider area median income, because our state is so diverse economically that it doesn't even make sense to do state median income.
Yeah. Yeah. Does anyone agree? Disagree? Yeah. Okay. Yeah, no, I think that's good. Thank you, Susan, for that. Without anything to add, then, which again, you can do at any moment. You can go right to this Jamboard Live and you can provide your feedback anonymously. And I think you even get to be an animal when you're anonymous. Moving to the 4th recommendation. And this is, again, we're part 3, supporting childcare and early learning. And you're recommending that we offer a thriving wage and support from burnout. And I would like to ask, what kind of support?
Just chime in here that it seems like a number of these recommendations are very similar.
Yeah, agreed.
And that many of them would be improved upon by moving to the cost of quality care rate model, which would then enable providers to offer the living wage, which would also assist with burnout if you're not quite so concerned about your finances.
Yeah. Did you say to pay I didn't miss, did you say quality wage?
Living wage.
Living wage, okay. Okay.
Which would be a quality wage.
Right, sure. Yeah.
We could use thriving wage. I know everything's sub. Oh, there, Lois put that in the chat too.
Yeah, very good. Love it. Thank you, Lois. Okay, yeah, very good. What else? And again, if there really is anything else and you kind of feel like it's there, or maybe, as Jen had noted, sometimes these might apply to some of the previous recommendations. So it's okay for us to kind of note that here, and then maybe in the end, we look at kind of, crosswalking the two recommendations together and making sure that we're not being duplicative in the process. So anything more? What other kinds of support?
Can I share from a director's point of view?
Yes, please.
I would like some way to find out what is working for different programs for burnout, a way to collaboratively share or meet once a month, directors I'm from a tribal Head Start and childcare, but I am, open-minded to whatever is working, because there is a huge burnout happening in my workforce. And I'm trying to support their mental health needs and their social emotional needs of the staff. And so I just would like to know what is working. I do like the roundtable discussions when I go to trainings and different meetings, but if there's any way to have, a Zoom meeting once a month, I don't know, just an idea. I just would like some more ideas from other agencies on what is working to support their staff going through burnout. Thank you.
Thank you. That's very well said. So with that, who out there has some success in helping with this, or moderate success, or even ideas on how this burnout can hopefully be rechanneled and turn it into reinvigoration, I guess, call it.
Eric, this is Susan. I think one of the challenges is because the childcare workforce is shrinking and every childcare teacher that remains is having greater and greater responsibilities and burdens placed upon them. I think we really have to think about what is a recruitment and marketing strategy to bring people to the field. And if that means, yes, you're going to have a high caliber health insurance that with low premiums or premium free, what are the things that are preventing people from entering this field? Because I'm telling you, when I'm subbing in classrooms and I am so far removed from the centers, and when almost every owner or director is subbing in classrooms and they're still trying to run their business. I mean, I think the urgency is we need more people to do this work. And unless we're going to make the investment to make it really attractive to work in this field, this is going to be a problem that's going to go on for a long time, and the field will continue to shrink. And we're going to have fewer and fewer families more and more families with fewer and fewer options. So that's my 2 cents worth.
That's good. I think that's a fantastic recommendation, and a low-hanging recommendation where it's actually something that DCYF could get behind in terms of creating some messaging about the field and some of the things and opportunities within DCYF programs and funding available in all those different facets. So that's great. Does anyone else have anything to share related to the support from burnout? And like I said, we see those chat questions, and we'll make sure that they're folded into the next round of recommendations and edits. So, all right. Well, with that,
I'll put some of the factors that we know around what how to staving off burnout, but also the sustainability piece from a mental health and somewhat systemic perspective. So I'll put that in the chat so that you have access to it.
Oh, excellent. Thank you, Mitch. I appreciate that. Very good. Okay. Next recommendation, and we are looking for more clarity here. You're saying make it easy to tease out what is being done to address wage inequity within the early learning sector. So as I read this, and it may be a little hard, it's a little hard for me to really understand, which I guess is why it needs more clarity. Are you looking at, or do you believe that the intended recommendation here was to better understand what DCYF is doing to address wage inequity within the early learning sector? Would that be a better way to word this? Or does that provide more clarity?
Eric, can I ask a question?
Yes, you can.
For clarity, that would be, I read this kind of as differentiating between our mixed delivery systems within early care and education and the differing pay that individuals receive. And I think, for example, of our state and federally funded pre-K programs, are programs that are funded through K-12 versus through DCYF, and perhaps the differing access to what would be a living wage, in that many of those are institutions, if you will, and early learning is not. So when I think about that, and when we continue to think about the workforce, we have workforce that are part of a larger, say, for example, union that may have more access to things like health benefits and retirement. And then we have small businesses, which is childcare and our family childcares, and even our centers that are owned individually that don't necessarily have the N, if you will, or the access to those additional support. So I think the inequity comes when we continue to look at wages, and we have folks that are not what I would say making a living wage or even a surviving wage. They're making just enough to keep themselves out of either of those places. So that's when I think about this, and it isn't necessarily a DCYF issue as much as it is as a deeper understanding by those who make decisions about the pay differences based on the access to where the funds come from. That was long-winded, but I think when I look at that, I don't think people necessarily understand that and how there are differing pay scales, whether it's TK, developmental pre-K, Head Start, ECAP, and who are their grantees or their contractors, if you will. I may be totally off base.
That's good. Claudette has a great recommendation in the chat, perhaps a list of options and explanations that would exist on the DCYF website. That was kind of what I was thinking. Was it sounds like maybe access to information related to this topic. And I know that sounds kind of general in a sense, but because there is work being done to address this, and so I don't know of a final, I don't think there's ever a final conclusion to it. So I think there's just so much different work being done that maybe finding a way for that information to be more accessible to you all.
But does this not go back to our earlier conversation around the tie-in between the other work? Because we have a group that is working on the pay equity issue and the living wage cost of care and the living wage proviso. And to me, that's kind of what we're looking at here, only we're disaggregating the data, if you will, to make sure that it isn't just one set of individuals that may benefit from some kind of a proviso, but that we're looking at all of the different delivery systems within early care and education to assure equity in wage, if you will, in some way. I don't know whether, but we are doing work, but so it doesn't sit separate by itself. I think it's all part of the work we're doing around what a living wage and a thriving wage looks like, and compensation package would look like for individuals in this early care and education field.
Yeah, sure. That's good. I actually got that noted in there. I think that is actually very important, that there is, I mean, the work is being done, like you said. So I think finding a way to make sure this recommendation ties in with earlier recommendations, related to those proviso work groups. So does anyone have anything else to add to this recommendation before we bump forward to the 6th? Well, I know if you did that you would be speaking up, so that must mean you don't. Moving to the next recommendation. So address burnout for caregivers and providers. And we are asking how. I believe this has already been addressed in a previous recommendation. Does anyone have anything additional to add that is related to the looking at solutions on what's been working for others, and then also making sure that you all are connected effectively for this type of topic? I don't know what that means, but obviously it's something that just means that we should be able to provide a little more information, because I know it does exist out there, and then make sure that those that are having success are connected with those that are looking for success. Does anyone have anything additional to add to addressing the burnout for caregivers and providers? Okay. And next recommendation. DCYF and the legislature should work with providers, parents, and communities to ensure that the workforce receives a thriving wage. Correct me if I'm wrong here. I feel like this has been addressed previously in some of the other recommendations, and I'm wondering if anyone has anything further to add to the overall topic of supporting a thriving wage and the work that's being done, and how that will work into some of the further work. And our sticky note has a survey suggestion to be inclusive of school age care, not just EL. We want to check in with the group about this language, and if we can use different language to be more inclusive. I will be completely honest, that does not make a whole lot of sense to me. So I'm going to have to make sure that I follow with Emily when she gets back here in about a week on that particular sticky note. It doesn't change, of course, the overall recommendation and with how we should work with parents, providers, and communities. Are there certain ways that you see DCYF currently working with providers, parents, and the community that are positive, that are already supporting that they receive a thriving wage? Excellent. Thank you, Anonymous Lobster. Lois is asking in chat, can we decide which language we would like to use around this topic so everyone is on the same page. I would open that up to the room and maybe ask Lois, which language specifically? Go ahead.
So Eric,
yes.
What I'm saying is that I think it's important that we as a group agree on if we're going to use living or thriving, or so that our language is consistent throughout the report. So just want to see how the group feels about that. I think it's important for our messaging to be the same. So I just want to ask the group how they feel about one or the other, so that, again, we're all on the same page.
I'll just add, I think thriving wage is more inclusive, because when you say living wage, then you can say, well, depending on where you live, that determines what living wage is. And I want to avoid that, because childcare workers need to be paid a wage that's commensurate with the value of the work that they provide. And when you think about the economic impact of the childcare sector and being the foundation that all other work is enabled by our work, we deserve a lot more than we get.
Yeah, that Lois, I will make sure that we connect that use of the term throughout. Of course, you probably see it here off and on, back and forth, but I assure you that when we get to the next level of edits, that we'll get that worked out as best we can. So thank you for bringing that up. Okay. Anything else to add here? Great. Open-ended question in chat. Thank you, Michelle. Or not question, I guess, statement. Does anyone have anything they'd like to add to that, to what Michelle just recommended? We'll need to define how we quantify a thriving wage. Does anyone have anything to share? I wouldn't expect anyone to have the answer to that right here and now, because I think that's a pretty big okay. Oh, good, Lois. That's actually pretty good. Did you all see that MIT calculator? Maybe something to look into. I think the statement itself leaves it open-ended, which is good, because there's obviously a little more work maybe that needs to be done here. So thank you, Lois. We can look at incorporating that. Very good. I'll copy paste that into And with that, we will jump forward to the next recommendation, that DCYF and the legislature should work with providers, parents, and communities to ensure professional development opportunities are accessible and affordable. That is a fantastic recommendation, and I think it does apply to some of the earlier recommendations in the professional development space. What I would like to hear from you all is a little more depth on the opportunities being accessible and affordable, especially considering Ray's conversation with you all today. I think this is a really good support of that. So how how can we better work with providers, parents, or communities to ensure these professional development opportunities are accessible and affordable? And that is an open-ended question.
Can I chime in real quick?
Yes, please.
So as I'm reading this, I get it, and I'm almost wondering if we could strengthen this recommendation by looking to a work group or a review committee or something of that effect, to really lean into and create the time for maybe some co-design to take place. This just seems to be a really general recommendation without giving some specific tangible ways to do this in a really authentic way. And I think even just at face value, when you read this recommendation, you could go, isn't that what ELAC is for? But as we know, there's not a lot of time in these meetings to really get down into the weeds with those kinds of things, nor is our ELAC membership representative of the full community that should be engaged with this kind of work. So wanting to get a little bit more specific around that, if that is what others would like to see happen too.
Can you let me know what the acronym is that you just wrote down, Eric?
Oh, yeah. Office of Racial Equity and Social Justice. And that was our first presentation today. Our only presenter earlier this morning was Ray Soriano. Yeah. So I think that would, based on Colleen's suggestion there about, this is a pretty big topic, and it's other than going real deep here, which I don't know if this is the space. Maybe this is a conversation that could be had with ORESJ and or a topic where they can, work with you all. And I'm not speaking for them, of course. We'll just make sure that we connect with them about some of these suggestions, unless Ray's here. But I think this is good. This gives a little support to where we could, I think, move forward on this. Anything else to add? Kathy, I saw you. Thank you very much for taking that hand down. I appreciate that.
Thank you. My hand was just going down in anticipation of you being called on.
Yes.
So I do agree with Colleen's comment. However, I think when this was first brought up, I recall there being a discussion around some collaborative work with OSPI, and they have some very good training opportunities, maybe around the pyramid model, different things like this that they provide to their early learning staff that may be very beneficial to make it be not just a suggestion, but something where OSPI need work with providers in the area to allow those opportunities to early learning providers in the field, center-based providers, because as most people know here, those can be very expensive. And so that would help with some of that professional development training. I think that was mentioned. I could be wrong, but that's what I recall was part of this ask.
Yeah, that makes a little more sense.
Can I say something? Hi.
Yes, please.
I couldn't find the raise my hand button. I work at OSPI and with the pyramid model, and we do have trainings, and we work with our ESDs on getting that information sent out. So if you need, I'm here filling in for Ryan Guzman, the 619 coordinator, but if you need more information around that, I'm one of the main people that coordinates those trainings, at least the Washington Pyramid Model trainings.
Oops, sorry about that. Thank you, Kelly. Good discussion. Okay, I will jump forward to recommendation 9. DCYF and the legislature should work with providers, parents, and communities to ensure there are proper resources and supports for infants, toddlers, and children. So my first question is, is this in reference to any specific resources or supports? Or does anyone maybe have clarification for that? Again, it's a pretty general recommendation. How do y'all feel about the recommendation? Is there some work that we should continue supporting? Because I do know there is work obviously currently being done for infants, toddlers, and children. And I'm wondering if anyone has anything to share related to that and continuing that support.
Eric, from a legislator's perspective, it's pretty vague, and so it's really hard to understand what it is that you want from us that's different than all the other items that we've talked about earlier.
Yeah.
I just don't know how I would support or help with that language. Yeah.
Makes sense. Senator Wilson.
I would respond to say, yeah, we need more clarity. One of the things I think for me, and I think DCOF would agree, and I think hopefully providers would too, would be an increase in rates for infants and toddlers, because that has been a continued issue. And especially as we work with our pre-K population, that's been a concern that's where the dollars kind of are with older children. And so we need to make sure that we are providing the opportunity for folks to have enough money to care for our youngest folks. So to me, that's kind of one of the areas. And then the other thing we hear about in particular right now, as I think about our fentanyl issues and issues around SUD and OUD issues around opioid and substance use disorders, and that continues to be a concern. And you add fentanyl on top of that. So as a legislator around that infant toddler space, that's critically important as we think about that as well. And again, I'm not sure, not only for individuals working inside with families, but also with families themselves resource. So those are a couple things that, come to mind. I probably shouldn't be saying that on this because hopefully that's something that y'all would say, yes, we need supports and education, but also the professional resources for both staff and families to access as we see families come into our programs. Maybe not.
Thank you. No, that helped put some framing behind it or around it. Does anyone have anything to add? Do we think this recommendation maybe is a little too vague? And not that the topic is just sidelined, but maybe looked at in a different way, like in the appendix or something of that nature. And I leave that up to you all. Or is it okay as is? Maybe should continue to work with providers could also change the connotation of the statement. Thoughts?
Could this also be around our ESIT dollars and expanding ESIT? Again, I hate to step in here, but infants and toddlers are critically important. I hear that out in the field, but I'm not necessarily hearing is that issues for everyone here are concern, and maybe not for everyone, but you know, early support for infants and toddlers. Again, it's a program we do have, but I know there's conversation about, is it enough? And again, are we serving as many and the families we should be? So, sorry, I'll be quiet.
No, thank you. This helps. I know this is helping stimulate some additional questions and thoughts out there. So this is very helpful.
And what I would say is, tell me no, y'all, because I mean, these are the things that I think about and when I talk to people. So I don't want to speak on behalf of others, and you all are there every single day and know. So if I'm way off base, please also say that, and respectfully, I'll hear that, because it is important to figure out where we need to work together to move ahead, and don't want to be putting time and money in a place that isn't necessarily going to be helpful. So I say that with all honesty, and trying to figure out, you know, how we need to support and resource a system that I know has not been supported and resourced the way it's needed to be, now more than ever before.
Wondering, just as we were talking about how to support providers with a thriving wage, essentially to help providers meet their basic needs so that they can do their work. What are the things that are in place to help families meet their basic needs of their infant, toddlers, and children? Where are we missing? What are the gaps in those things? So I think definitely just kind of trying to think about where the gaps in resources are for families with young kids.
Well said, Nugent. Okay. Well, how's everybody feeling? We're a quiet bunch out there, but I know that if you did have something you did not agree with, that you know this is a space that we want you to share. We'd like you to share, good or bad. So, and thank you to those that are helping facilitate the conversation, which really is what we're after here. I think from the conversation is where all of your really good recommendations and the specifics will come from. So with that being said, we will move forward to the 10th recommendation of 19. I don't know why there was an extra slide added. I obviously did that, so don't let that deter you. We are a little over halfway from finishing. And this recommendation is DCYF should create more outreach strategies that allow community gatherings. I think the recommendation is somewhat straightforward, and maybe some clarity behind what would be the desired outcome of doing this and what would be the benefit. So with that, I'd love to hear some of your thoughts on this recommendation. How do you feel we have done in currently providing outreach to you on community gatherings coming up and or even meetings or information, and this is a pretty open-ended question, but I'd love to hear if maybe what you're trying to say or the group is trying to relay, in addition to some earlier recommendations, that maybe putting a little more of a conceptual or strategic marketing and communication plan behind this would help connect a lot of these missing pieces, or not missing pieces, but some of the information that, we know there's community gatherings out there, and then how does DCYF make sure that we find those and are connected with those, and then also tell you all about it and make sure that you find and are connected with those. Nucha has a great suggestion: community building and resource training. I think that's a great place to start for sure.
Eric, this is Susan. I don't know if this applies, but I think some of the work that we're starting to see happen with leadership at DCYF, going out and doing site visits. So it's not even as much as community gatherings, but actually going to see the impacts of what, and talking to providers in their environment about, what are the licensing rules that are barriers for them or helpful for them, or to actually see what it's like to deliver programs. I think that's a good next step. And that way it's not making decisions, sort of in a bubble, but actually knowing what's happening in the field. So I think it's a great new thing that I'm seeing happen that I would encourage more of, and not licensors. I'm talking like Nicole Rose and Ruben Reeves, and, people that are higher up who actually have the ability to make the decisions, but also are maybe furthest from what is actually happening on the ground. So more site visits from leadership, and more connecting from leadership to providers and communities, I think is a really good idea. And we look forward to more of that with the Greater Seattle Child Care Business Coalition, but I think communities across the state would benefit from that as well.
Yeah, okay. That's a great recommendation. Waylon agrees. I agree. I do believe that there has been some work that's been being done on creating, an outreach strategy. Call it an umbrella outreach strategy, which really kind of gets behind, having that clear, concise messaging that really makes sure that all these different pieces are relayed effectively out to you all who we're trying to connect with. So I know that DCYF leadership will see this recommendation, and I think that's very valuable for them to hear that what they're doing is a good thing, and please continue to get out and support us and be in the field and live in your environments. As they make decisions then that affect all of you. Okay. We will move now to the next. I think that we have some clarity there. Okay, this recommendation is DCYF should develop an easier platform like a web page to be used to collect feedback and requests. So, excuse me. Currently, if you wanted to leave feedback or requests, you all most likely would send an email to whatever general, division or department, maybe, or do you feel that you know how to do that? I guess would be a good place to start. If you wanted to just give us feedback or make a request, do you all feel like you know how to do that? And I think for just a little more clarity, obviously meetings like this are spaces where you can do that, right? So, you currently do that with us. And so I don't want you to think like that this is, I'm wondering if you know how to do this, because we're currently doing it. And I'm really wondering if you know of an easier way that we could achieve this. And with your recommendation on the webpage, I think that is a great suggestion. I can tell you that there is always work being done on refreshing some of the landing pages, or the pages inside the DCYF website. So I think that this recommendation will be very useful for that group. And what essentially this is would be like a lead capture. So DCYF could have the ability for you all, as you come to this landing page, where it would be a really easy way for you to see and make requests as they relate to a lot of these items. So yes, Lois, I hear you on that one. And that is a continued work in progress. So good thing is DCYF, they are working on these items, and they will continue to. Yes, Senator Wilson.
Well, I was just going to do a shout out to DCYF for the Fair Start webpage, because clearly I can say to somebody, just Google Fair Start for Kids, and the first thing that pops up is the webpage that's dedicated to that legislation, and very user-friendly as you work through that. So I think it looks very different in some ways than if you go on to the regular DCYF website, which has all of the programs and everything there. So, it was a way to kind of hone in and focus. So really appreciative. And I understand what people are saying. It's really hard sometimes to know where to go. And the other thing is, we can't just do it once. And I saw a little thing in the chat around PSAs, and that's really not funny. We tend to think we can say something once and people will remember it. And how are we continually sharing, those kinds of mechanisms, or those places where people go for information, because one time isn't enough. And how are we kind of in an ongoing way making sure we're notifying and making sure people know, whether a PSA or another way. But I think we think, we do it one and done, and then we think everybody knows, because we work, again, if we work in it every day. So I think it's an important thing to think about as we move ahead, especially as changes continue to happen in the system. Thanks.
Thank you. I will make sure and share those kind words for those that had a hand in doing the Fair Start for Kids Act landing page. Obviously, you can see it was done a little differently, and it was, really thought in more of the intent of the visitor, and how you can create an experience for that visitor that truly identifies and matches their intent. And when I say intent, I mean, why are they on the page and what are they looking for? So I'll share that. And in response to Lois's recommendation on kind of duplicating that style of page, fantastic recommendation. And I do believe that is already kind of in the works with some of the web page refreshing that will be going on. So I would anticipate that you'll see a few different landing pages or web pages within DCYF's page that will start to take on a little more of that user experience workflow. So great suggestions. And please, if you all see or use other websites that you really like, you like the way they feel, you like the navigation, please share that with us, especially on this particular recommendation. Again, Jamboards are going to stay open, so we do encourage you to come and provide a little more context to some of these things if you didn't have a chance to do it in the live version. And this would maybe be a good chance for you to give us some examples of things that you've seen or like, and that allows us then to create a little better user experience for you all. Okay, we'll move forward to number 12, I'm going to have to zoom in on this one. My eyes are not going to get there. DCYF should work with the Washington State Board for Community and Technical Colleges to ensure that those utilizing provider access and community equivalent PACE who want to end up with a Bachelor of Arts in Early Childhood Education, ECE, have the opportunity to do so. What would the group like to see that is different from what is happening now?
I have a question really quick.
Yes.
This is my first meeting and I'm really curious and I apologize if I'm not understanding. I mean, I understand, but I just need more information.
Yes.
Are there scholarships available through DCYF to encourage increasing this workforce? Are there any scholarships for ECE? I'm just curious. And if there aren't, is there any way that that's a possibility to increase the workforce? For childcare and for early Head Start programs. Thank you.
Thank you, Lola. Nice to hear. Welcome, and nice to hear from you. We appreciate that. I don't know the answer to that. I'm wondering if there is somebody here with DCYF that might know that we do not, or maybe there are some, not necessarily scholarships, but funding opportunities, I guess you'd call it.
Here. I sort of got off the Zoom and just was able to re-enter. So I think I only caught part of it, but we do have a variety of scholarships programs primarily aimed at those participating in early achievers. But I definitely can pull together some resources and send them. I can put some in the chat really quickly too and send some Lola's way if that's helpful.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Absolutely.
I'm still learning, so I appreciate that information.
Yeah, thank you, Amy. Hey, I'm still learning too. Now I know. Okay, great. How about anyone else? Can we help with a little more background to this? I mean, to me, it kind of seems like it fits within supporting the growth of the early learning workforce, like bringing more people into the field. Right? Like, I mean, making sure that maybe it's not just those, or maybe not just working with the board with seat tech. It's, I don't know if I got that right. If it's really more of making sure that, you know, we're working with all. So I wonder if anybody has any thoughts to share there.
Hi, this is Kathy. I might be able to add a little bit of insight to this. I think, and I could be a little confused, but being a provider, I know that there are different opportunities for the professional development piece to be obtained for different roles in centers and homes. And one of them is called PACE. There are college accredited ones that are the certificates, the initial certificate, the short certificate, and then the state certificate that are in line with what role you have in there. Those are college credits. The PACE program is not college, to my knowledge, there are no college credits associated with it. It's a different way to meet the criteria without going to college. So in reading this at face value, it implies to me that they're looking to actually create some sort of college credits to be attributed to to people that choose the PACE route, that want to continue with their education pursuing a BA. I think that's what they're saying. I mean, I'm just, like I said, I'm just reading this at face value, and that's what it sounds like to me with what knowledge I have.
That's really good clarification, Kathy, if you're right. And I think you probably are. I'm wondering if maybe the individual that had this specific recommendation might be here. Okay. Well, I think that's probably important to identify to make sure this recommendation does fit. First off, does to the membership or to the group here, do you feel like that should be something that should be available for those that do take the PACE route, that they can actually get college credits towards or to earn their Bachelor's of Arts in Early Childhood Education? Senator Wilson, yes, please.
This is where I don't think I got enough information in my own mind. I would be also maybe looking to Rep. Levitt to see what she might know about this. But again, I think what I would want to see or know is what are the pathways that one has and the choices and where it is and the multiple pathways to outcomes. So PACE may or may not be able to, but it would really depend on what that was and then what the kind of how it would fit prereqs for what an AA might be or an AAS and how that fits in. Because I don't think you'd go from PACE to a BA unless there was some other work in between, because there are steps before that. And so what I don't have, and I don't know if it exists, and it probably does somewhere, is where is the matrix of, we do have qualifications, and we do have pathways, and maybe where one systematically can flow into another and where one doesn't. And then that's where I would look to say, okay, here's where one looks at a gap, but I couldn't tell whether this was a gap or not unless I actually knew what the requirements were on either side, and then whether they in fact kind of were scaffolded or scaled in a way. Does that make sense? I mean, this is where higher ed has to be involved, as well as workforce and all of those other things. So but just saying we want to go from PACE to a BA, I don't think is there's not enough information there to actually, I think, call it a recommendation without a bit more exploration around what that actually involves currently in our system.
And if I may jump in to piggyback on the wonderful senator who is fabulous in these areas, I would agree. I think maybe a better way to frame it would be to ensure pathways and chunking opportunities to access for degrees and credentials in child care development or something like that. Because I think of, and I'm happy to reach out to the State Board of Community and Technical Colleges and ask them for a matrix of what they have now as it relates to childcare providers and education, and can share that back with Eric, maybe to share with the team. But oftentimes it's a chunking mechanism that one program leads to another that is accredited. I think is what Senator Wilson may be getting to as well, as how do those work together. And the State Board has really done some good work on a lot of other industry chunking opportunities and access and show that. And so I'll ask them to do that for childcare if that's what you would like me to do.
I would like that. I don't know if I can speak on behalf of the group, but of course, I will be sharing that with you all. So I think that would be great for sure.
Okay, I'll add that to my to-dos. Thanks.
Okay. I think this recommendation probably should be a little more active voice as well. So, and again, all these recommendations were just pulled right from the survey. So we didn't really go in and edit them much, but we will this next time around and kind of make sure that these are all in more of an active voice, not about what should or what is being done. So any more to add to this recommendation? Okay. Well, 15, looking good, everybody. And And our next one, I am going to have to zoom in. The recommendation is, in addition to sharing information and providing access to PACE and other educational pathways, the experience waiver should be broadly promoted that providers are aware of all of their options. The experience waiver should also be available to childcare directors. And our question to you all, is this directed to DCYF only, or is there a legislative component? And is this answered or supported through the matrix that Representative Level had spoken about earlier? Thoughts?
So I hate speaking without actual knowledge, but I have heard, and I don't see DCYF staff here now that I've heard it from, so I can't point to anyone, that they are working, who's they? DCYF is working on trying to create an experience waiver pathway for directors. Currently, if you are a director of a program, your pathway is only education. You must seek the credits, the college credits. That's the only way to get there. And there's been a lot of discussion around people that have a lot of years of experience in the field that are currently directors that are told you don't meet your requirement, and after a certain amount of time, or your job requirement, and they would essentially lose their position if they don't continue with school. So that is being worked on, I'm being told, so I don't know how to word it here.
Okay.
The three pathways, I mentioned the one earlier, there was PACE, the actual certificates, the state certificate, and then there's the experience pathway. But for directors, that's not an option. And I think that the explanation of those items aren't really broadly distributed. I just recently learned a bunch of things about the experience pathway that I wasn't aware of. So maybe there needs to be a little more sharing of that information directly to providers.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Kathy. That may make for an appropriate topic with either maybe provider supports or ELAC at a later date. So especially if there is some work being done on our end that will actually look at creating some of this pathway. So thank you for sharing, Lois. Lois says that DCYF controls this piece. The ask is that information be advertised broadly. This should be an easy request to grant. Okay, anything further on this recommendation? And it sounds to me that this is really just a DCYF only. We will move forward to no hands raised. I can't wait to listen to this recording, which I will do, and hear how much I talk to myself. So you all are getting to hear the inner monologue, such as this. So recommendation 14, we have, this can be clarified on the DCYF webpage. Excellent, Claudette. That's actually a really good suggestion. DCYF should continue to offer scholarships and FSKA funded premium assistance through the Washington Health Benefit Exchange. Would this require legislative action? Is our question. This may be a place where hopefully Senator Wilson is able to provide some context.
Well, I can, I'm looking at this and I can't necessarily speak to the scholarships, but my intent and the intent with the premium assisted health benefit exchange was while we were trying to figure out what a salary schedule and a pay scale would look like. In my mind, that would be inclusive of healthcare and retirement too, just saying, that we would do this as a way to continue to support the profession. And my hope is that it's a temporary solution to a place where we get to a place where providers have healthcare and providers have, and directors and owners have the ability to provide that to their employees. And so right now, I believe it is a budget proviso and it's a fiscal piece. But I also heard that there were numbers of individuals that weren't necessarily able to take advantage of that based on the income level that was placed in that. So that piece, if there was a change to what's currently happening and there was a want to increase, say, the income level of individuals that were eligible, that would be a legislative change. If it's around continuing to fund those stipends, that would be a budget proviso. And my hope is the work to integrate it into whatever package comes out would be the work that would continue to happen with that design group that's working on the proviso right now to put all the living wage things together. I hope that makes sense. So I see it as a bridge. And related to the other question, I think that's a DCYF question around perhaps around the scholarships. I'm not quite so clear on speaking to that one. And I don't know, Amy, whether you might know or someone else on might know.
Thank you, Senator Wilson. And I think you did a great job of describing how we are hopeful to include health benefits in the cost of care rate model, right, in the work of the design team right now. So that's future. The use of the word scholarships, it makes me wonder if they really mean scholarships or do they mean some sort. I don't know who made the recommendation, but I am wondering if they mean some sort of stipend for healthcare, because putting scholarships and healthcare in one sentence or one recommendation doesn't quite seem to fit. Eric, do you know who made that recommendation, or could we flesh that out? We do have two different scholarship programs, and I just can't help but think that the word scholarships isn't the word we're looking for this particular recommendation.
Yeah. I don't know if we can. We'll see if in SurveyMonkey, if you can pull that stuff out, and then we can maybe just go directly to that individual as well when we do get into the next iteration of this report, however that is going to look. That we'll probably have some questions in there that we'll try to flag for those that we'll be reviewing. So hopefully the intent is that individual actually sees this, that we're saying, hey, did you mean this? And that would help then obviously clarify that. So we won't put a pin in this one because I think the recommendation is solid, but we obviously do need a little bit more context, and we'll see if we can try to find the individual. Jess, not to put you on the spot, but do you know, is that possible to do that?
I don't believe so. I believe everything was anonymous. We didn't ask for any names.
Okay. Yeah, that's what I thought.
Can we make sure that we do I don't know if there's a sticky note, I can't really see, but to make sure that we put a note around raising the income level for those eligible while we're using the health benefits exchange as just something to flag, which is something that could be a budget proviso or could be something that we considered short term. Thank you.
I'm going to note that at the 12:25 mark. Okay. Anything additional on this recommendation? Obviously, there's a little more work for us to do on this, and maybe we can get that answered between now and the next report development or the next stage. So A little more to come, but you'll definitely see this included because I think it's obviously very valuable to the overall report. And moving to number 15. When new requirements and mandates are implemented, DCYF needs to prevent the cost from being passed to families and should provide funding in addition to technical support. We're wondering, could this be rephrased to be directed at the legislature? So I guess maybe would this be more of a legislative ask? And should this be reframed to account for that? I'll leave that up to the group.
No, I did not write this recommendation, but I can comment. From a provider perspective, it often seems as though changes from licensing regarding everything sort of come as unfunded mandates, whether it's your current, playground ground cover is no longer meets the standard. You have to buy this other thing.
Yeah.
With already tight provider budgets, that's complicated and potentially driving people and centers out of the field. So I think that's what this recommendation is asking, but I don't know that for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, so maybe being passed to providers and families. Would that be a little more appropriate, or does the group feel that?
Yeah, I think if the provider then has to pay for something, that cost is likely being passed to families.
Absolutely, yeah, I totally agree. Colleen, do you have something to add?
Yeah, I'd really like to second what Jen said, that's very true. I mean, childcare businesses are our revenue stream is families paying tuition or subsidy coming in. We don't get to choose a subsidy rate. So when, costs come in, not only are you passing them on to your families, but you may be actually passing them off 2- and 3-fold to your private pay families because you don't have capacity to change what you're receiving from subsidy, but you have now a cost increase. And so you have to pass that cost along to your only viable revenue stream that you have access to adjust. Also then with the stipulations that, parents can only afford what they can afford. And so a lot of times these costs actually eat into profitability of the business, which if we have businesses that are functioning without profit, they're being further unstabilized by that financial climate. And Jen gave a great example of like ground covering, and that's true and real. But also I want to lift up other examples that are much more perpetual than that. Yes, there could be a large cost with replacing your ground covering in one instance, but I also want to highlight the fact that a lot of the regulations that get changed are actually things that are cost drivers of your daily operations. Just, how you can sub-staff, whether or not your aid can be considered in ratio or not, so on and so forth. Those things are actually really astronomical cost drivers because those are every hour of every day in your business. So not to at all downplay what Jen shared, but I also just wanted to lift up the severity of some of the other options that are being made or choices that are being made, especially in rulemaking processes. I don't think providers are as a whole against regulation. It is against having unfunded mandates and we want the kids to be safe. We want to lower our liability in those issues, and we can do that via some of these regulations. But the problem is the regulations need to be funded, and especially when there's significant changes from previous practice, you can't put those in place without also finding the funding that goes along with it. It's just not possible for families to afford that, or for providers to manage it. I mean, it's a huge change to our operations when these things happen. And I think a lot of us feel like we don't have a voice at the table when those decisions are being made. And we have no way to impact the cost to our business before they're, put in black and white for us to follow.
Thank you, Colleen. So this would, just to be specific, this would be essentially a legislative ask. Would that be correct? As far as applying funding to mandates?
I think it's twofold. I think if the department chooses to go through rulemaking and add to the rules, then it should be on the department to request funding for that in their decision package, and to make sure that those things are funded before those rules roll out. So, I mean, the legislature is not going to know every single little rule that is coming through DCYF, but I think that it should be mandatory for DCYF to identify how that would be paid for and request that funding via their decision package. It not have to be, then you're putting it on the back of advocates to see this rule coming down and now advocate for funding, support all that sort of stuff. When for me, I think it could be kind of an internal mechanism.
Yeah, good. That helped. I think that's pretty clear. Does anyone have anything else to share or in support of with what Colleen was referencing? Okay. Those great ideas and clarifications coming. Okay. Now, this one's looking a little different. It's going to throw my ADD off here a little bit, my OCD, excuse me. So the recommendation relates to language access, and it looks like we have a number of recommendations that are related to that. So first, work with providers to identify spaces that already exist. Create opportunities for providers to build relationships via expanded language access. And provide, let me get off that, sorry. And provide, I'll worry about that later. And provide resources to hire bilingual staff for customer service, frontline staff, licensors, and coaches. Include cultural competency training for translators and interpreters that are not a part of the communities they are serving. When feasible, pay providers to translate and interpret for their community. Create a glossary and clearinghouse for language access resources. Would be great to see language about partnerships with schools and their language access resources and supports. This would be particularly helpful for programs at schools. And our question is, this appears to be a DCYF directed recommendation. Would that be correct? Okay. How about, yes, Senator Wilson, please.
I'm so sorry, but okay. So my wonder is, within Fair Start for Kids, we have funding for different grants and buckets of money. There's equity, there's dual language in there. And my curiosity is how many of these things are potentially covered inside of Fair Start for Kids, which those grants are based on availability of dollars. So they are not, unlike the subsidy and the copay, which is written into Fair Start for Kids, ongoing, right? It's part of the maintenance. There are other things within Fair Start that are buckets of money and based on the availability would be funded. So it sounds to me like perhaps we need to look at what is currently available inside of Fair Start for Kids as far as monies that relate to this. And then is it something we need to put in statute and lift up out of Fair Start to make it ongoing funding in statute? Or is it something we need to fund again and put forth as a budget proviso? I hope that makes sense, because again, it just is based on whether there's dollars available for that or not. So, but inside Fair Start for Kids, much of this is there. And then the other piece of that is Rep. Orwell and I did a bill 2 sessions ago around language access in K-12. So there is a whole another bill that is implemented now and has been being implemented the last 2 years around language access. And again, as we think about our K-12 and our school partners, wondering what knowledge there might be around that bill for programs that sit inside K-12. So there's that piece of work as well.
Okay. That's good reference, because obviously I think you're right. There's a few of these that are actually connected to FSKA here. And then some of the orange stickies, I believe, may have been added by some of you all. So we do have one here. Is there a recommendation to increase bilingual staff? So I don't believe there was a specific recommendation, but I would like to hear some of your voices on that recommendation, and maybe should that be included? And what would that look like? How is DCYF currently doing it in providing language access? Do you feel we have enough bilingual staff? Do you feel like we're providing materials and content and information that's accessible to those that speak a language other than English? How are we doing? And if we can improve, then how can we improve? Or are these the ways we can improve?
I would also help you look at the partners you're working with, like Imagine Institute and those folks that actually are supporting providers and such out in our communities, again, and how it ties into this. So I guess I'm trying to figure out, is this all inside out or is it also outside in? So is DCYF have access to what they need, but are we talking about recruiting folks out in our programs as well? I am not sure as you talk about this, Eric, I may be confused. Or is it an and both within DCYF as well as the larger profession, if you will? Or are you talking just DCYF?
I would be speaking in just DCYF terms.
Okay.
But of course, that's open for interpretation for sure with the group. Colleen, yes, please.
Yeah, trying not to take up space in this topic, as I'm not an English language learner, and so I have pretty ready access to communications from the department. But I do want to uplift others that share pretty frequently that they, struggle with a lot of the language access things, knowing that I partner with others in Washington Communities for Children to provide meetings that are simultaneously translated, at least in Spanish, because that is the request we've had so far. But knowing that we are definitely reflecting on the need to expand those kinds of things, and also just call out the fact that DCYF has moved towards having webinars in different languages, which I think is a huge step forward, but also making sure that those aren't isolated and separate, like kind of segregated webinars, because I, being proficient in the English language, may be speaking to something that is very nuanced, especially when you're talking about a WAC code or other types of things that I have the privilege to dive into because I have access via language to do that. And if I share that in an English speaking webinar and no one shares the same nuanced factor in a Spanish speaking webinar, those Spanish speaking providers have now not gotten the same information that others received. So it's really leaning into the equity of how language access. So it's not just creating isolated separate opportunities, but rather making sure that we're inclusive of all languages in everything that we do. And that would include meetings like this. I'm sure there are a lot of participants that would really, really struggle to keep pace with us in even just this one meeting, for example. So I think that there's a lot to be learned there. And I just want to reiterate, like, this is obviously not my personal experience, but rather just an experience that has been shared with me from others, and wanted to take the opportunity to uplift that for them.
That is that's a great reference to bring forward. And Jen has actually a question that thankfully we do have a very positive answer to. Jen is asking, are groups like ELAC and provider supports doing a disservice to the community by being English only? And from a community engagement perspective and my own personal belief, I wouldn't say we're doing a disservice, but we're definitely not providing the experience for all to be able to get access to the same information that everyone else is getting in the way that they're comfortable with. So, of course, we need to improve. And thankfully, we actually are doing this. And at the next provider supports meeting, I won't go into too much detail because I think Jess knows how the sausage is made here, but we actually will have a bilingual experience at the next provider supports meeting, where there will not be two different conversations or two different call it presentations. So that involves an interpreter and a translator, and or the same at the same time. So we are taking steps to make sure that we provide, those types of meeting formats and or webinars in multiple languages. And I think it's very important that they are inclusive of each other. That's a great reference, Colleen, about this conversation should not be three different conversations. It should be one conversation where everyone can just participate how they are comfortable with doing that. So more to come, or for those of you that will be in provider supports, you will see how we do with that. And good news is I am not responsible for any of that technology, so it should go smoothly. But back to the language access recommendation. Do you guys feel there's any more that needs to be added here, or are you comfortable with this recommendation as is, at least moving forward to the next edits? Okay, I see no microphones clicking on. And just a few more here. I appreciate you all sticking with us. We still have 21 of you, so that is fantastic. This recommendation is NRM needs to happen before provisions of the Washington Administrative Codes that impact early learning communities are changed. I hate to ask, what is NRM? Can somebody?
Negotiated rulemaking.
Okay, thank you so much, Kathy. Okay. Pretty straightforward and self-explanatory. Does anyone have any context behind this as to maybe why this is important?
I think the issue with negotiated rulemaking prior to WACs is that often, or not often, DCYF has unilateral control over when they initiate negotiated rulemaking, and they can make WAC changes without having any type of a feedback or communication in advance if they deem it necessary. So I don't know if that was part of the context of this recommendation or not, but I know at one point I had said that I thought they should have to, anytime there was going to be a WAC change, that they needed to engage in negotiated rulemaking. And I remember that was basically something that couldn't happen. I don't remember the whys. I don't remember, all the details, but that's what I know.
Okay. Does everyone feel comfortable with the recommendation as is? Again, I think it's pretty straightforward, and obviously DCYF will, I think be able to understand what it is that you're saying. So I don't know if there needs to be too much context behind this. What do you all think? Good?
Does this apply to other things like maybe that are not WACs, but rules that don't have to go through that process?
Mm-hmm. I think it could. I think this actually could become anything you all want this to be. So absolutely, if you would like to include more than just WAC changes. What does the rest of the group think? Well, as you've heard me say before, these Jamboards are going to stay open. So for those that have something that comes to mind, you'll have an opportunity if you'd like to put a little more context behind this. But for now, as is, we'll keep this specific to the provisions of the WAC code changes. And moving ahead to recommendation 18. Providers who have ECAP and non-ECAP slots should have access to apply for both. I have heard this. I have heard you all talk about this before on a few times over the last year or so. So I do recognize that there is a need here for you that you're looking at, or I guess a pain that you're looking at solving. Can somebody maybe provide a little more context to this as to why they should have access to both? Or maybe why they're not able to have access to both? That's a pretty technical question.
So I'm once again just going off my memory, and I thought this was with regards to some funding like complex needs funding. There may have been some grants or funding streams that providers were told because you're an ECAP slot, you cannot apply for them. And yet they may have needs outside of their ECAP children that have needs to access those funds, but they were told they couldn't. I thought part of this was solved. Okay. Historically, but I think maybe we're looking to have this be across the board to allow when you are both an ECAP provider and a non-ECAP provider that you can apply for various funding streams.
I think one of the things in Fair Start for Kids that happened was that ECAP and early ECAP already had a system set up within DCYF for the grant money and such for complex needs, and that our childcare system hadn't been set up yet, so it was available, but they were two different pots of money for those things because of the two different systems. And but what I'm hearing is that so that, I mean, it was one of those issues around systems that hadn't been set up yet. But as we move forward, I think the other thing was, again, the cost per child and the money that's available to our comprehensive pre-K programs that already have, in many ways, access to more services and supports than childcare does. So we also have to look at that when we're looking, until we can get an equitable system, how we continue. But I would hope if there was a site that was serving both ECAP and if there was a mixed delivery site, that it was clear that that you're not getting money for kids that aren't in ECAP, so that it would be that would be something to make sure we didn't have a barrier or something that allowed half the kids not to have access to a service that the other half do. I guess I'm a little confused about that. It's two buckets of money, but there was money available for both. So I'm not sure.
Eric, I think we should definitely clarify if we're truly talking about complex needs fund awards, or if we're talking about accessing ECAP slots, because I think the question does need to be updated so we're really sure on what this recommendation is. And I know that Kathy referenced that she thought that there was a solution early on, and we did adjust the opportunities for both ECAP contractors and then licensed ECAP sites to ensure that there was no barriers and that everybody was able to apply for funds. So I think some of this has been worked out. But I in thinking about Senator Wilson's comment also, I do know that we definitely try to keep a close eye on the funding source to ensure that we don't have two different funding sources going to the same essentially provider. So I think that some of that might look like we're creating barriers, and so we can look into that, but we definitely don't want two awards going to the same organization or provider. So there could be a little bit of that happening right now too. So it could be a very good recommendation that we definitely should look into, and it probably would be a DCYF focused thing, but I would want to sleuth out and get very specific on what this recommendation is and what it means.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks, Amy. That will definitely be one where we'll need a little more context to it, even more so than what we have. Okay. Does anyone have anything additional here? Anything we can clarify? If I had anything other than fake wood around me, I would knock on wood, because I think we're actually going to get through this entire recommendation, unless the last question is some 10-part recommendation. Thank you. I think we're going to be able to get this done. So this is a huge help to, I mean, not only DCYF, but the CE team. So, we can actually get some, not closure, but just get this thing to the next step, right? Like get it there so it can actually start being reviewed. So we do appreciate all of you hanging in here for this and getting through it. So I should stop wasting time then. We have last recommendation in this section is, we might already have a solution. There should be a Fair Start for Kids Act webpage that shows progress, timelines, and what will and will not be implemented. So our question is I have to zoom in a little. There is a web page that showed a high-level timeline They have asked C to find out what else they would like to see here. It sounds like they want additional information on past. So, okay, I think I can help answer some of this here. I continue to go the wrong direction on the Zooms. Okay, the FSK webpage that you're asking for, again, just maybe a little more transparency on all the moving pieces of the Fair Start for Kids Act and what has been done, what hasn't been done. I do believe that I don't know if there is work in progress on that, but I do believe that at some point, as DCYF starts to refresh some of their web pages, like the Fair Start for Kids Act webpage, which is a really good example of, again, of a good user format. Adding some type of feature like this, and I completely understand what you're asking for. It's really just, there's lots of examples out there of interactive timelines where we have buckets of information that simply connect to one another, like some of the other pages that we have. So I think that this particular recommendation is a solid recommendation, and I even believe that it's something that could have some traction down the road as a lot of these other pieces, because this is more of a webmaster web development rather than an early learning type task. So does anyone have anything to add to these additional elements to the Fair Start for Kids Act webpage? And if you haven't gone there, you should go and check it out. Yes, Susan.
Yeah, what I was wondering about is, I think we talked about this a little bit before, is when, yes, we want to know the timelines and what will or won't be implemented, but when something is determined to not be implemented, is that just, once you guys make that decision, is that a done deal, or is that one of those, like, this is an example of sort of that negotiated rulemaking? Like, if you're not going to do something and why, and we want to communicate about why and perhaps change your mind about that decision, is there a process for that?
I don't know the answer to that.
Thank you, Phil.
But I know that, obviously there's probably a little bit of both, right? Like, I think that's probably something we'll want to follow up on. Unless Amy, you want to take a swing. I think this is something, though, that there's probably a lot more context to it. So I would hate to say there is or isn't, when I do believe there is an answer here. Oh, Amy, can you go your volume up a little more?
Oh, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Oh, maybe that was my voice. Maybe I was being very quiet. I apologize. The sticky note is blocking the actual original question too, so I want to understand what you're hoping I can call. Oh, the Fair Start for Kids Act webpage. And we did initially put so much effort into trying to make this informative. And then I do know that we've had some conversation with executive committee over the past few months around updating to ensure that we actually show metrics and progress, not just on the funding, but all of the supports and the work that's happening. And even now that implementation has occurred for most projects, like what's next. So we're having discussions on how we can make that happen. I think this is a great recommendation, and definitely something DCYF can take and use and do something with. I think that what that might look like is coming up with some visuals at future ELAC meetings to get some more feedback on that. But I do know that we have heard that there is interest in making sure that we have better dashboards and some different metrics that are on that webpage, and definitely planning on that.
Yeah, good. Okay, perfect. So yeah, a little more to come, Susan and all. But as Amy said, I think that those are some items that can definitely be looked at as they continue to refresh those. And that leaves us with one part and one question remaining. We are right at time. I hope that none of you have a hard stop at 1. I think we can get through this pretty quickly. And if you do have to go, we are going to have a survey monkey that's going to go out at the end that is going to ask you, what'd you like? How did we do? What additional information would you like? Kind of the same typical reflection, call it. So Jess is going to put that in there right now. Thank you, Jess. That way, if you need to get out of here at 1, then please do go and share. Let us know what we can and can't do better and how we can't make this experience and the information and the report itself a little more progressive. We will also make sure in the survey or in the follow-up materials that all the links are included. So you guys can go to each of these and maybe add some additional. So with that, I will move on to the last recommendation, and that is to determine what resources would be beneficial to support providers serving infants and toddlers with special needs. DCYF needs to look at funding on the whole continuum and increase the dollars coming in. That is a pretty straightforward recommendation. Does anyone have anything to add to that? Thank you, Amy. One clarifying question I think would help us is when this term, special needs. I know we've used this before, and it always hasn't been used properly. I'm wondering if a more uniform term, which I know DCYF has been using to kind of identify these needs as complex needs. It may not be a perfect term, but is everyone comfortable with changing special to complex?
Those are two very different things in my mind. Sorry
about that. I had my headphone dead.
When I think special needs, I think in young babies, infant toddlers with developmental intellectual disabilities, with physical disabilities and such. When I think complex needs, oftentimes they're social emotional kinds of things as well. So I guess it would matter. I guess I would want to know the definition to make sure that we were not, we were very clear, and it can be an and both. Right. And whatever we do though, just to make sure, because I do understand we want to use appropriate language, but I don't want to mix up like the complex needs that's in the Fair Start for Kids Act is a narrow kind of a look at some things in it. Anyway, just be very careful about that without being clear.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, I was not aware it was actually a very narrow definition, so I'm glad you pointed that out. Enrica, you have your hand raised.
Oh, yes, I was just going to first of all, I agree with what Senator Wilson is saying. Complex needs does convey something very different. When I read this, I wonder if this is in reference to early support for infants and toddlers. Definitely a different language. I would use different language than special needs. When referring to early support for infants and toddlers, you could use something like infants and toddlers with developmental delays and disabilities. That would be more appropriate than what's listed there. But I think getting some clarification around, is this a recommendation specific to increasing the funding related to ESIT, to full funding, for example, or is this are we trying to look at more than that? I think, having some clarification there would be beneficial.
Excuse me. Do you think that we should vet that out here, Enrica, or do you think that maybe in the next round that we can kind of flag that this needs a little more clarity and see if we can't capture it that way? And
well, I know it's after
okay.
1, so
right. Yes,
it could be maybe making note of what's the issues that are being raised, and then folks will have opportunity to take a closer look at that and weigh in, so we get the report done on time.
Okay. Okay. Good. Well, then, with that, does anyone have anything last or final to end, or excuse me, to add? Sorry for the word jumbling. I've been doing a little talking here. Okay. Well, I am going to go ahead and end this report development session. I'll hand it over to Enrica and Lois for closing. Is that correct, or am I doing that?
I think it's Lois.
No,
it's Lois. Okay.
It is. Thank you very much. So, just want everyone, you see the Survey Monkey for those who are left. Sorry, we went a little bit over today, but appreciate those who are able to stay. It might not be a bad idea, Eric and Jessica, to send out the Survey Monkey, since we've lost quite a few people between the beginning of the meeting to where we are right now. So would appreciate that.
Yeah.
Our next public meeting is scheduled for December 5th. And we just ask again for your feedback. It helps us to do our jobs better. We thank you all very much for working through this. Again, next scheduled ELAC meeting is December 5th. Thank you for joining us today, and please be sure and complete the meeting reflection feedback. Appreciate everyone for that, and have a good rest of your day. We'll see everyone in December. Thank you, Eric, for facilitating, and the rest of the DCYF team for moving us through this process.
Yeah, you bet. Thank you all. Good work.